Hela's Vanguard by AizenTheGoat, link in the description. Chapter 1. Asgard. The home to many, most notably Thor, Odin, and at one point in time Loki. It was a beautiful land made of giant gold buildings and breathtaking landscapes. Now however it looks a lot different. What was once a beautiful sight was now dull and looking worn down. If one were to look down into the actual city, they would see hundreds of Asgardian soldiers laying dead on the ground. Blades embedded into different parts of their bodies. All but one soldier was dead. The warriors met their end by the same person. The person responsible for the massacre was a woman who looked no older than 25. She wore a form-fitting black and dark green bodysuit with a portion of the shoulders missing. She has long flowing black hair as well as dark shadows around her eyes. Her name is Hela, Odin's daughter, the firstborn child of the former king of Asgard. "Go back to whatever cave you crept out from," yelled the final Asgardian warrior, "you evil demoness," he added before charging. Unfortunately for him, he didn't get very far as Hela wounded her arm back and created a blade that pierced the man's body. He was left suspended on the blade, his feet not touching the ground. Taking a look around to make sure no one is standing, she turns around to her companion. He's a bald-headed man with 2 tattoos on his head and armor. This is Scourge, the man she ended up giving a job to. He didn't exactly accept, more like not answer, and didn't get killed for it. "Come now. We have things to do," she says as she walks past him. Scourge takes one look around before following suit. The two made their way through Asgard in direction of the Bifrost. To both of their surprise, Hofund, the sword that activates the Bifrost, was missing. "Impossible," Scourge says while running up the steps. "It was just here," he added before turning to look at Hela. The goddess narrowed her eyes in anger before turning around and walking away. Scourge caught up to her and spoke, "We'll find the sword. Whoever took it can't be too far away. See to it that you do. But never mind that now. There's something much more important we must do. Hurry along now," Hela told him. Seeing that she wasn't in the best of moods, he didn't speak and simply walked faster to keep pace. He wondered where they were going. To his confusion, she took them to Odin's throne room. Having not been in there that many times, he looked around taking in the sights. He stopped when he noticed Hela stopped walking and was looking up at the mural on the ceiling. The goddess of death felt a deep anger flow through her as she looked at the images. "This is what Odin replaced the truth with?" she hissed out as she took in the pictures of Thor and Loki. "Look at these lies. Goblets and garden parties?" she hissed. She looked at the next images. "Peace treaties?" She said no more, instead opting to create multiple blades and strike the ceiling at different points. Scourge watched as the ceiling began breaking before completely falling down. He moved out of the way as to not get hit by debris while Hela stayed put. When the slight smoke cleared, he noticed a different mural. Scourge frowned in confusion as he stared at the new images. Odin in the center, around him images of battles portraying Hela and himself as well as one other notable person. Hela began explaining to him the story of how Asgard was a force to be reckoned with before Odin seemingly had a change of heart. He tuned part of her out as his attention was focused on one image in particular. Odin and Hela side by side. Odin holding up his golden staff and Hela holding up a hammer that looked like the one Thor used. What really caught his attention was the other man. In that same image there was a blonde man standing behind Hela. The shocking part was that his arm was holding her around the waist, pulling her towards him. He too had a staff being held up into the air. It was nothing fancy, a simply thin black staff with a C shape at the end of it. And as our ambition grew greater than his, the old man decided to seal us away until the end of time, she finished. Whether she knew that Scourge wasn't listening, he didn't know, but he was thankful she didn't call him out on it. He was tempted to ask her who the guy was in the picture but didn't get the chance as she continued on forwards. "Let's go," she told him. The two walked down a few sets of stairs before Scourge realized where they were. Odin's vault, he whispered to himself. He had only ever heard of this place. It was said to contain only the most powerful artifacts. They walked down the path, lined on both sides with relics. Hela stopped at a golden gauntlet. "Fake," she said as she knocked it over. "Most of this stuff is fake anyways." "Weak," she commented as she looked at the casket of ancient winters. The crown of Surtur, she noted, was smaller than she expected. The tesseract was, in her opinion, not bad. Finally she came across the item she was looking for. "Now this is truly special. The eternal flame," she said as she dipped her hand in it. She pulled it out and Scourge watched as the flames danced in the palm of her hand. Hela produced a weapon out of her sleeve and proceeded to smash the ground until a portion caved in. Looking down, all that could be seen was darkness. The goddess turned around. "Want to see what real power looks like?" she asked before letting herself fall backwards into the pit. She flipped right side up on the way down and landed gracefully. She looked at the bodies of all her warriors and her trusted dog in sadness. With the eternal flame you are reborn," she exclaimed before slamming her hand on the ground. The flames turned green and began consuming everything around her inside the room. The skeletons of the long-dead warriors lit up in green flames before giving them life. Fenris' eyes glowed before it too began standing on all fours. Soon her former comrades were all awake and began walking towards her before kneeling. "I've missed you," she said looking at Fenris. "I've missed you all," she repeated to everyone else. She waved her hand and all the undead warriors began jumping out of the hole. "We're still missing one," she said quietly to herself as she walked deeper into the room. She walked for a good 5 minutes down a set of stairs until she found what she was looking for. It was a pitch-black room. The only light visible was a small fire in the corner of the room that didn't seem to give off much light. In the center was what looked like a large boulder. Etched into the stone were hundreds upon hundreds of Asgardian runes. "The old fool really outdid himself with this," she said as she ran her hand along the stone. Her prison weakened with his death but not his. It made sense to her though, of the two he was the stronger one. Not that she'd ever admit it to him, she didn't want him to get a big head. She placed both of her hands on it before pushing her power into it. The runes glowed a bright green before cracks began appearing on its surface. Soon it was done, the boulder exploded. XXXXXXXX. Blackness was all he knew. He didn't feel anything around him, see anything, or hear anything. It wasn't that he was deaf, no, there just wasn't anything around to make any noise except for his own breathing. All he had were his thoughts. He didn't know how long it had been since he'd been trapped here, he'd long since lost track. It felt like forever though. Most of the time he spent going over just how he had ended up here. It had been so sudden. His life was great, he and Sasuke had defeated Kaguya with a bit of help from the sage. The two worked out their issues and Sasuke had finally seen the error of his ways as Itachi had wished. Everything was good, but over time he noticed something strange. As he grew, so too did his power. It seemed that Hagoromo had given him more than just a small power boost. Eventually his power became so great he had no equal on his planet. When his time finally came, and he died of old age, he found himself in a similar room as the one where he had met his mom. Only this time he wasn't with his mom. The only other person in that place was a whitish-yellow figure with no distinguishable features. When he asked who he was, the figure referred to itself as the one above all. He explained how his power had reached heights that should have been unattainable to mere humans. As such, he would not be going to the heaven that his world leads to. Instead, he would awaken and reside in a place called Asgard. Before the blonde had a chance to protest, he was ejected from the space and awoke in a completely different place. Not only that, but he looked the way he did when he was 24 and had his old power intact. After a few years in his new home, he joined their army and quickly rose through the ranks. Eventually his power was known throughout the lands and he found himself as Odin's right-hand man. His word was only less impactful than Odin's himself and his daughter Hela. Hela and himself were Odin's main weapons in their conquests. The two of them would lead the charges against enemies, both invading and defending, and together took many lands. The 9 realms were won basically because of them too. Their chemistry was good, so well that they were almost inseparable. It came as no surprise to anyone when word got out that the two were together. Over time they grew even closer and eventually with Odin's blessing they wed. They were powerful, they were feared and respected, everything was good. That was until Odin feared that Hela's ambition for power and dominance was growing out of hand. Odin had a difficult choice to make. He loved his daughter and son-in-law but feared for the future. He knew that wherever Hela went her husband would follow. His fear drove him to seal them away for all of eternity. The blonde never saw it coming as one moment he and Hela had just finished a hard battle and were exhausted. As they were preparing to depart, Odin had ambushed them. A beam of light from Odin's staff was the last thing he saw before the familiar blackness took over. His musings were interrupted as a green light appeared in front of him. His eyes grew wide as he realized what was happening. Suddenly, for the first time in years, he hears her voice. "Welcome back, darling." He hears. He couldn't see her as the bright green light from the fire, as well as not seeing light in years, had left him sensitive for the moment. It would take hours or days for a normal person to recuperate from this. For him, however, it only took a few minutes. When his eyesight was back, he finally saw her face. Hela was as beautiful as he remembered. He walked forward and wrapped her in a hug. She sighed but returned the embrace nonetheless. Emotions and such were never really her thing, but she'd make an exception. He lets her go and takes a look around at the now broken rock he was in. "So what have I missed? Where's that old man?" he asked, referring to Odin. "The old man is dead," she said happily before taking a look at his tattered clothing. Before anything else though, she trailed off. She snapped her fingers in his direction and on him a new set of clothing appeared. He now had on a pair of black pants along with a form-fitting black and green shirt. Over the shirt was a piece of black armor covering the chest and shoulders but leaving the sides open. He had matching arm guards on both arms. Matching colors, huh? He grinned at her. She snorted quickly in amusement before walking off. Come now, I'll fill you in on what's going on, she told him. He followed suit and left the room and jumped out of the hole they were in. Scourge noticed him and realized it was the same guy he'd seen in the mural. He looked innocent enough, unlike Hela, but he felt something was off about the man. Odin's gotten some new ones since the last time I was here, Naruto commented as he walked alongside Hela. Yes. Too bad most of the things in here are either fake or weak, she says before turning to Scourge to tell him something. The two noticed that their blonde companion was no longer walking alongside them. Touring around, they found him looking at a glowing blue cube. That's the only decent thing in this place, she commented to him. He didn't answer, instead his gaze was kept on the cube. He was looking at with concentration she hadn't seen from him before. What is it, darling? She asked. Again he didn't reply, instead he picked the cube up and began to close his hand around it, then began adding pressure. In a matter of seconds the cube let off a small pulse of power before it was crushed. When he opened his hand again, they noticed a small blue stone inside the small pile of glass that was the cube. Naruto dropped the glass, leaving only the stone in his hand. So this is an infinity stone, the blonde said to himself. Odin told me about these stones once. There's 6 of them, each giving the user great power depending on what stone he or she has in their possession. This will be useful, he commented. He took off his arm guard and pulled his sleeve back. On his forearm was a simple storage seal from when he was alive. He placed the stone close to it and the others watched as the stone disappeared. The seal glowed briefly before it died down. Well, now that that's done, Naruto began as he went and wrapped an arm around his wife. Lead the way, he finished. She shook her head in amusement but continued nonetheless. Scourge meanwhile watched in confusion the whole time. He was about to speak when his new queen turned her attention to him. Find the sword. I don't care if you need to turn Asgard upside down. I want it found. Understood? She asked. Scourge gulped but nodded. Good. We'll be back in a few hours. Now go. The man left the vault on a mission, for he knew if he failed he was as good as dead. So where are we going? Naruto asked. Hela let a smirk grace her face. To our chambers, of course. It's been over 1,500 years, you know. I'm getting impatient, let's go, she told him. Naruto's eyes widened in excitement as he knew he was in for a good time and hurried after her. After a few hours of fun and a brief explanation later, the two now refreshed entities were standing before the inhabitants of Asgard. Hela looks out at the people before speaking up. Everyone here has decided against our rule, she says, referring to herself and Naruto. One of you knows who stole the sword to activate the Bifrost, or one of you yourselves has stolen it. So we're going to give you a little incentive to hand it over. You there. She points at a woman in the crowd. Bring her forth. On command her warriors retrieved the woman. She was crying, pleading to be let go, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. A public execution. Haven't seen one of those in a long time, Naruto commented as he watched Hela present Scourge with an axe. Just as the man was about to bring the axe down, a man in the crowd admitted that he knew where the sword was. Take us, she ordered. They were taken to a mountainside where 2 giant doors were closed. The goddess began creating blades, but a hand on her shoulder stopped her. Please allow me. I haven't been able to really stretch my legs since I've been free, he told her. She took a step back and gave him some space. Very well. Smiling at her, he raised his hand in direction of the door and used his magnet release to forcefully pull the door off the mountain. It remained floating in mid-air until he dropped it down, using it as a bridge for them to get across. After you, my queen, he told her as he extended his hand. With that being said, the army headed in. She walked in with her army following suit, only to find out that the chamber was now empty. The undead warriors began storming the room looking for any hidden citizens, only to come up with nothing. Hela narrowed her eyes in anger and was about to speak before she was cut off by a banging sound. Then another. That's coming from the throne room, Naruto commented as he looked in that direction. Thor is here. I'll be sure to kill him this time, Hela said. Who's Thor? Naruto asked. My brother. The god of thunder, she told him using air quotes when saying his title. Your brother? Perhaps I should meet him, he said, rubbing his chin. But before that, do you mind making me another staff? I could make one myself, but it won't work for what I have in mind, he asked her. Hela brought her arm up in his direction. On command, a pole began extending out of her sleeve until finally the whole thing was revealed. Scourge noticed it was the exact same one he had in the picture on the mural. The blonde held it up for a second, making sure everything was right before nodding in satisfaction. He rolled up his sleeve and smacked his forearm, allowing a poof of smoke to appear. Once cleared, it was revealed to be the space stone he had taken from the cube. Holding it in his right hand, he slammed it into his staff just under where the DC shape at the top began. The stone let off a pulse of power as it sat in the staff before calming down. "Now let's see if this works," he said as he applied a little chakra to the staff. It worked as the stone began to glow and a dark blue portal appeared in front of him. "Alright, now we can go," he said as he held his hand out to his wife. She takes his hand and walks forward, but not before stopping to speak to her executioner. "Deal with the people," she ordered as they left through the portal. The two deities reappeared in front of a shocked Thor who wasn't expecting this at all. Before the god of thunder could speak, Naruto stepped forward. "You must be Thor, nice to meet you," he said calmly. Thor frowned, not understanding who this strange man was. "Who the hell are you?" he questioned. He'd never seen this man before. "Oh right, my bad, I haven't introduced myself yet. Naruto Uzumaki, I'm your brother-in-law." Thor was baffled. If the situation wasn't so dire, he'd believe this to be one of Loki's tricks, brother-in-law. He repeated to make sure he hadn't misheard. A nod was his answer. I married your sister a long time ago. Isn't she the greatest?" he asked, turning his head to glance at her. Now Thor knew something was very wrong. His sister, the greatest? Most definitely not. The demigod turned to his sister. "He's joking, right?" She let out a chuckle. "No, he's not joking. I actually did marry this simpleton a long time ago," she replied while running a finger under the blonde's chin. "But let's not discuss that now. You're in my seat," she said as she ran her hands through her hair, allowing her antler-like headpiece to appear. "Believe me, I'd love for someone to rule Asgard, but it can't be you because you're the worst," Thor replied. Hela turned to the blonde. "Don't interfere," was all she said before the two siblings began their duel. The blonde frowned but complied nonetheless. As the two were duking it out, he could sense multiple battles happening near the Bifrost. "I'm going to go enjoy myself," he said to his wife before he used the stone to teleport himself out of the room. Those opposing Hela didn't know it yet, but they were in for a bad time. Chapter 2. Naruto appeared in the center of the bridge leading to the Bifrost where the Undead Army plus Scourge were fighting. All participants briefly stopped what they were doing as he arrived, but soon went back to their business. All but one, that is. A man dressed in an elegant green and gold outfit under Asgardian armor along with a golden headpiece with two long curved horns stepped forth. "This man is Loki, the god of mischief." "I'm sorry, but who might you be?" Loki asked. Naruto looked him over briefly before answering. "Well, if you want an official title, then it would be Hela's Vanguard. That or her husband. Both of those would work really," he answered calmly. Loki shook his head with a slight smile. "I'm sorry, I thought I heard you say you were my sister's husband, but I'm sure I must have misheard." Naruto smiled at the man. "No, you got it right. And you called her sister, so I guess you're my brother-in-law too. So you're Asgardian," Loki concluded. "Somewhat," the blonde replied. "I wasn't born here, but due to circumstances here I am," he added before using his staff to smack a warrior off the bridge into the sea below without taking his eyes off him. "Well," Loki began as he kicked an undead knight away from him. "I love chaos and destruction as much as the next god, but you," he said pointing at Naruto, "don't strike me as the type. So what's your game?" he asked. "My game? Originally it was to kill Odin for what he did to us, but he's dead now. There was once a time where I'd be against all of this. But after Odin betrayed us and Asgard went ahead and swept us under the rug like we never existed, I couldn't care less about this place. Imagine giving everything you had for Asgard only to end up being stabbed in the back. Everything we did was for the greatness of this place, and for what? Odin sealed my wife and I. The people didn't care enough to spread word of our existence. They just let us fade away." Seeing that he had the man's full attention, he continued. "But you want to know the worst part of it? It was with Odin's blessing that I married Hela and was accepted into the family. The man used to call me son and would constantly tell me that he was glad I was the one his daughter had married. To have one of the people who seemingly cared about you the most turn on not just you but his own blood. To find out they were weary of you. It changes you," he finished. For a moment Loki felt a pang of empathy. For he too felt Odin didn't really love him as he had claimed. "So what, you're here for revenge on the people then?" "No, I really don't care about the people anymore," the blonde answered. "Or Asgard in general for that matter. But Hela wants her rightful place on the throne and I'll help her get it," he added. Loki chuckled slightly. The man still wasn't getting it. Yes, I get it. You're in love with my sister and will seemingly do anything to see her happy. That's fine, I get all that. But what's your deal?" he asked, emphasizing your. "Surely you have aspirations of your own rather than just following her around?" he asked. The god needed information. He could feel the strength this man possessed. While he looked innocent enough, he stood tall and didn't seem to worry about what was going on around him. The mere fact that he possessed the space stone and had the ability to use it was reason enough to be weary of him. If he could somehow convince this man to join him, then perhaps his chances of survival would increase. As he finished his train of thought, an image of a purple giant with golden armor appeared in his mind. "You're right. I do have aspirations of my own," the blonde finally answered. "You see, one of the main reasons why wars begin is due to lack of resources. There's too many mouths, not enough to go around. When Odin told me about the Infinity Stones, I looked into it anywhere I could. Eventually I found something. I found that should anyone possess all 6 stones, they will basically become omnipotent. That's when it hit me. With all 6 stones I could create unlimited resources in the universe. No more hunger, no more poverty, no more destroying planets for resources. Hela will rule Asgard as she should, and I bring the universe as close to peace as possible. Of course there will be people who try and cause conflict for other reasons. But with the 6 stones in my possession, well, I think they'd think twice about it, don't you think? So you want to collect the Infinity Stones?" Loki asked. While he looked calm on the outside, on the inside he was the embodiment of happiness. This was perfect. This might be the perfect person to beat him. "Well, if that's the case, then there is something important you should know. You're not the only one." Now all that was left was to talk the man into joining him, and everything would go smoothly. Things were looking up for the god. As Naruto was about to reply, a huge lightning bolt struck the palace where Hela and Thor were currently fighting. Naruto looked up and saw the god of thunder coming down in their direction. When he landed, he noticed that the man's right eye was black and no longer open. Standing beside Loki, Thor turned his head towards his brother. "Worry not, brother. He may be strong, but we can take him," he said before he ran forward, lightning charging itself around him. Loki didn't have the time to react as his brother rushed in. "Wait! Stop, you oaf, I had it under control," Loki yelled. Unfortunately for him, his brother did not listen and had already begun his assault. Loki watched as the blonde just weaved and dodged every attack Thor threw at him. Thor, having realized that close combat wasn't working, jumped back and summoned lightning from his hand and directed it at Naruto. Said man brought his staff forward and began to spin it at a ridiculous speed in front of him. The lightning collided with the staff and dispersed soon after. As soon as the attack died down, Naruto used the staff to parry a lightning-enhanced punch to the right. The moment he parried, he swung his staff back around and hit Thor once in the ribs before redirecting the staff to hit the man with the bottom of it under his chin. Both hits were done in rapid succession. Before Thor had a chance to compose himself, the blonde then kicked him hard in the chest, sending him stumbling back to Loki. The god of mischief watched as his brother was completely outclassed and merely stepped aside, letting his brother tumble past him rather than help slow his body down. He noticed Thor getting up again, and it didn't take a genius to know he was going to try again. As Thor moved past him, he stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "Why are you stopping me, brother?" he demanded. As he answered, a black and green portal opened up next to the blonde, and out of it stepped their sister. "Well, for one, Hela just arrived. And second, we were about to come to an arrangement before you arrived. I need you to stand down," Loki told him. Thor looked over at the two and back to his brother and nodded. He didn't want to back down, but decided to put his trust in Loki. However, just in case, he had instructed the Valkyrie to get the crown of Surtur, as he realized exactly what he had to do. If in the next few minutes they couldn't handle things peacefully, well, their home would be destroyed. "Now, as I was saying," Loki began, "you're not the only one who's looking to collect all 6 Infinity Stones. However, unlike you, this person isn't looking to use them for reasons as noble as you are." "I see, and are you planning on telling me who this person is?" Naruto asked. Loki grinned. "I might. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement." Hela scoffed next to Naruto. "He really sounds like Odin. Really ticks me off," she commented. Naruto just looked at her amused before turning his attention back to Loki. "Okay, I'll bite. What kind of arrangement?" he asked as he tilted his head to avoid an arrow. "We become allies. This man is not one to take lightly. He's powerful, unbelievably so," he responded. "You're afraid," Hela said. "Whoever this person is must be far stronger than you, and you feel the need to seek protection," she added. Loki glared at her before willing his anger down. It wouldn't do to get angry at the moment. He could swallow his pride for the time being. "You're partially right," he admitted. "I do not seek protection, but rather allies, as he will no doubt come looking for me." "What do you mean, brother?" Thor asked seriously. He'd never once heard Loki admit to needing help. This was worrying. Loki was going to answer but was beaten to it by the blonde man. "Your brother must have worked for him at some point. He began, either you screwed up and he's after you, or you backstabbed him. Either way you're on his shit list. He clarified. As he finished his sentence he noticed that the ship that was being loaded with the Asgardian people was beginning to take off. He closed his eyes and gathered his chakra. Using his magnet release he created the magnetic field around the area and pulled the ship back down, crashing into the bridge they were on. Alright, so what do you want from this alliance then? Thor was stunned. His brother, the god of mischief and lies, was actually solving their issue with arguably the two strongest beings they've seen in a civil manner. He never thought he'd see the day. All I ask is that when that man comes to try and kill me you give me a hand with him. Likewise, he'll be coming after you soon too. After all, you're in possession of an infinity stone so he'll try and take it from you. Loki answered. That and you leave the people of Asgard in peace. Thor butted in, glaring at his brother briefly for not mentioning that bit in his negotiation. You can have all the peace you want around here as long as they kneel before me. Hela answered back. That's all they have to do. I'm the rightful heir to the throne and as such I'm their queen. Once they kneel before me this can all end. We'll accept this so long as the executions cease. No ruling with an iron fist. This isn't your time anymore. Times have changed. People have changed. Thor said. Hela narrowed her eyes and was about to retort when the ground began shaking. Everyone looked up as a large chunk of the land behind them exploded as a giant monster of earth and fire began rising above Asgard. Oh no! Thor whispered. What did you do? Loki asked angrily. I sent the Valkyrie to release Surtur. He was cut off by his fellow blonde. Destroying Asgard would drain Hela of her power. He finished. Tremble before me Asgard! Yelled Surtur as he raised his sword high in the air. Would have been a brilliant plan had I not been here as well. Naruto commented as he watched Surtur wind up his weapon. Naruto stood calmly and materialized a truth-seeking orb through his hand and willed it to take the form of a large disc. I'll be back in a second, don't do anything stupid now. He said before a blue and black portal opened behind him and took him in. Thor was tempted to attack Hela now that the blonde was gone but decided against it. Everyone watched as Surtur swung his giant blade down into the city, destroying a few buildings before something unthinkable happened. As he was scraping the sword along the ground it hit something before turning into dust. What has happened? Thor asked. What happened to Surtur's weapon? He followed up looking at Hela then at his team. It was the black shield he created. It's one of the many abilities my beloved can use. Hela answered. Yes, of course it is, isn't it? Loki asked rhetorically. Seriously, how many abilities did this man have? Over in center of Asgard the blonde was looking up at the giant as if appraising him. Well, you're bigger than last time, that's for sure. The blonde commented. Not that it'll make much of a difference for you though. Rather than answer, Surtur brought his hands up high in the air preparing a hammer fist. At least that was the plan. Seeing what was to come, Naruto once more activated the stone and disappeared from his spot before reappearing above them. Once more creating a truth-seeking orb, he changed it into the shield once more and thrust it straight into the giant's arms. The effect was immediate, his arms all the way to the elbow turned to dust. The giant let out a monstrous scream, not in pain but in anger. Willing the stone to send him back to the floor, he activated his magnet release once more while the beast was screaming. As he raised his arms in the air, the destroyed pieces that were buildings of Asgard levitated into the air around him. He created 5 giant nails out of the debris and made a motion with his hand. All at once the 5 pieces flew to the giant. 2 impaling him on each leg before the final one embedded itself in his chest. Now to finish him off. He commented. He smacked the bottom end of his staff into the floor and allowed himself to be pulled into the portal once more. He reappeared in front of the now kneeling Surtur and brought his hands up in a single hand sign. Senpo, Rantun Kuga, he thought before releasing a very sharp and thin stream of light from his mouth. He twisted his head back and forth rapidly and was pleased as the beam easily cut the giant in half at the waist and removed its head from the body. The head dropped down and landed with a very hard thud which left a small crater in the ground. The blonde approached it before turning it to dust with a simple thrust of his arm. With the crown of Surtur having been reduced to dust, the eternal flame which had powered the man was put out. Within seconds all that remained of the giant was bones and ashes. Asgard for the most part was intact with the exception of the few buildings he managed to destroy. Having finished what he had come to do, he tapped his staff and was once again being pulled into the portal. Back on the bridge, both Thor and Loki were staring at the distance in disbelief. That shouldn't be possible. The God of Thunder said out loud. At that moment their final team member joined them on the bridge. Thor, what happened to Surtur? She asked as she jumped high into the sky before landing next to the brothers. One moment she saw the giant prepare to destroy the city and the next he was gone. As she moved her gaze from where Surtur had been, she realized that the two weren't fighting against Hela like she had expected. She was about to ask about this when she stopped dead in her tracks. Next to the goddess of death, a portal opened up and out of it came someone she had hoped to never see again. Her eyes widened and her mouth dried up. She tried to talk but no words would escape her. Even the sound of Thor's voice asking her what's wrong couldn't help her. All she could think about was the day she and her sisters in arms were decimated by Hela and the blonde. How easily he had brushed them off. Hela was powerful, yes, but the blonde was on a completely different level. Valkyrie. That finally got through to her. I don't know what has you so shaken up, but fear not. We're close to resolving the problem. Hela's husband is surprisingly a lot more reasonable than she is. Thor told her. Well, began Loki, watching you take care of that pile of bones was entertaining, but we do have matters to attend to. So do we have a deal? He asked. The blonde rubbed his chin in thought. What do you think? He asked, turning to Hela. The goddess turned to the Asgardians and stared at them for a minute before speaking. That depends. Will Asgard be left under my rule? She asked the trio. As long as you honor your part of the deal, we'll leave Asgard to you. Thor conceded. Not exactly how I imagined this playing out, but very well. We have a deal. Naruto said. As the words left the blonde's mouth, Loki let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. They had really lucked out. Had it been someone more arrogant or power-hungry, he doubted things would have gone this smooth. Naruto turned to Hela and nodded in the direction of the undead warriors who were still in a deadlock with the remaining Asgardian forces. Understanding what it was that he wanted of her, she walked forward towards her army. Though they had a truce at the moment, the Asgardian trio were still on very high alert as she passed by them. Halt! She commanded. The battle is over. Pull back. Her army followed her order obediently and began walking back towards Asgard. Thor walked up as well and said his piece. Citizens of Asgard, we have come an agreement. Hela will be the new ruler of Asgard. Seeing that some people were getting wide-eyed, he quickly continued. But worry not, as I shall be around to make sure she keeps her end of the agreement. He added, successfully calming the crowd down. Now please. Let us make our way back to Asgard. An hour later, the group of 6, since Banner had finally landed, were in the throne room. The room was missing a ceiling as Thor and Hela had destroyed it during their battle earlier on. The goddess wasted no time in taking her spot on the throne. Naruto took his spot standing beside her and crossed his arms, his staff still in hand. All right, time to keep your part of the deal. Naruto told Loki, who is it that's coming after the Infinity Stones? As Loki was about to answer, they noticed that the sky above them was getting darker and in seconds Asgard was covered in darkness. Jumping onto the roof of the building, they noticed a ship slowly coming down. It was many times larger than the ones the Asgardian people were trying to escape in. Turning his attention back to the blonde, he spoke. That would be the Mad Titan Thanos. Chapter 3. Thanos. Huh? The blonde says to himself as he watches the spacecraft hover above them. The citizens of Asgard had already ran into the city in a panic. The group watched as a blue beam shot out of the ship, hitting the ground a few yards away from them. In a split second, 2 figures appeared. The first was a ash-gray figure, short in stature, who had white hair slicked back. The man had no nose and wore dark gray armor with some gold trim. The second was a tad bit taller than the first. He's a reptilian-looking man with scales. He wore similar armor to the first, though he left his left shoulder exposed and wielded a large metal chain hammer. So which one of these two is Thanos? Naruto asked Loki, taking his eyes off the two. Neither. The god of mischief replied. These two are his children. He clarified. Really? Hela interrupted, truly faces only a mother could love. She mocked. Naruto chuckled and was about to speak when he was cut off by the shorter of the two invaders. Hear me and rejoice. Began the short one. For your salvation has arrived. You will have the privilege of being saved by the great Titan. And in your certain death, every last one of you will become children of Thanos. He continued. Today. Whatever he was going to say was stopped as Thor interrupted. Loki. Who the hell are these two? He asked. Ah, the son of Odin. My name is Ebony Maw and this is Cull Obsidian. The now named Maw introduced. We are the children of Thanos and we are here for one thing and one thing only. He said before pointing at Naruto's staff. The stone. Naruto lifted the staff up to his face and stared at the two through the deceived shape. You mean this one right here? He asked rhetorically while pointing at it. Yeah, that's gonna be a no. He says while resting it on his shoulder. You have been going on for a bit about this Thanos though. He's the one that wants it, right? Tell him to come down here himself if he wants it. Naruto challenged, the smile never leaving his face. Ma, on the other hand, did not look as happy. He narrowed his eyes and held his arms behind his back. Without turning to his partner, he gave the order. Bring me the stone. Cole made a grunt of acknowledgement and slammed his hammer down before walking their way. Everyone but Naruto and Hela prepared for battle but were stopped as Naruto raised a hand. Cole sped up and jumped high into the air preparing to bring the hammer down. Move! Naruto ordered as they all jumped back. Not needing to use hand signs, the blonde inhaled a deep breath of air before expelling it in short rapid bursts. The result was wind bullets traveling faster than the eye could see. Cole managed to shield himself from 3 using the hammer but was eventually hit by 6 of them in the chest. Naruto did not give him time to recuperate. He appeared in front of him and began wheeling the air around them. He began making slicing motions with his hands in front of Cole. The man's chest armor broke effortlessly as an X began appearing on his chest where the wind was cutting into him. Seconds later the wind had managed to completely cut through the man, leaving only pieces of the scaled man remaining. Now only one thing remains, Naruto said. Ma narrowed his eyes and raised his arms. Debris laying around began to levitate as the man prepared his attack. Naruto stared up at the ship before closing his eyes and activating his magnet release around the entire area. He raised his arm towards the ship, made a fist and began pulling. To everyone's amazement, the giant ship began coming down before hitting the ground with a force that could be felt for miles. When the shaking stopped and the smoke from the impact cleared, another blue beam hit the ground. This time a more imposing figure stepped out. A giant purple man stood tall. He wore golden armor with a matching golden helmet. On his left hand was a matching gold gauntlet. Though what caught everyone's attention was the bright purple stone shining from just above the knuckle. "That's Thanos," Loki said in slight fear. Being around the Mad Titan always put him on edge. "So you're the Mad Titan?" Naruto asked, stepping forward, staff still resting on his shoulder. He noticed the giant man's eyes focus on the stone the whole time before focusing on him. "That's the name that stuck with me in the past years, so yes. You're an interesting one though. To be able to wield an infinity stone is not something just anyone can do." "Who are you?" Thanos asked. "Naruto Uzumaki." The blonde answered. "I'll try and remember that. Now you have something that belongs to me," Thanos said, looking at the stone once again. "Is that so? Funny. I was about to tell you the same thing," Naruto answered while pointing his staff at the gauntlet. "I see. Ma, take care of the others. I'll get the stone myself." Ma nodded and began his attack while Thanos stared down the blonde. Naruto knew Thanos was on a different level than the other two. The way the man carried himself was proof of that. Most would be sweating in apprehension knowing that a Titan was heading their way, but not him. After years of being sealed away and his power being unmatched in the world, he felt a shiver of excitement run up and down his spine. An opponent who would put up a hell of a fight. He was by no means a battle maniac, but even he couldn't resist a good battle every now and then. He gripped the staff hard and the space stone began glowing, as if ready for the fight as well. The ground underneath Naruto broke as he charged at Thanos. The Mad Titan's eyes widening at the speed. Naruto went for a punch that Thanos tried to anticipate, but it was a fake out as Naruto twisted his body in to give a heel kick, but Thanos was just as quick. Grabbing Naruto by his heel, he started to spin, going so fast that all the others would be able to see was a golden-purple blur. Releasing Naruto, Thanos gave chase, striking Naruto while he was still flying until finally grabbing the man by the face and slamming the back of his head in the ground. Usually that would have taken a normal person out, but not our favorite blonde. He did not even have time to reach for the staff as Naruto got back up, rolling his neck with a cheeky smile. "Not bad, old timer. You ready to get serious now?" Thanos gave a chuckle, taking off his armor bar, his gauntlet. "You have a lot of spunk, warrior. I admire that. Something I used to have when I was younger." Naruto was once again on Thanos, rearing his tight fist back as the Mad Titan did the same. A massive shockwave followed, sending Asgardians flying. Thor could only look in awe at the powerful display in front of him. Loki watched in unease, hoping things would go his favor. If his brother-in-law couldn't beat the Titan, no one would. Hela watched in pride. Pride that her husband could go toe-to-toe with one of the most powerful beings in the universe and hold his own. Standing in the middle of the busted street was the two. Naruto's fist meeting Thanos as the two battled for dominance. Then with a roar and a blinding light, Naruto was in his most powerful form. His armor glowing white as his six paths power was activated for the first time in what felt like forever. With his now enhanced strength, he sent Thanos skipping along the street from the power of his punch. That alone though would not be enough to stop Thanos. The man regained his footing and got on the defensive. Naruto appeared in front of him and began throwing combinations of punches and kicks which were deflected. Likewise, Thanos tried using his bigger form to try and cause as much damage as he could. One of his punches was actually caught by the blonde before being tossed aside. Using that brief window, did a jumping spin kick to the face that landed and managed to have the Titan stumbling back briefly. He didn't have much time to recuperate thought as the blonde was on him. Naruto buried the staff into the ground at the handle and quickly launched 4 chakra-enhanced punches to the chest and ribs in the blink of an eye. If the grimace on the Titan's face was any indication, he would say they were doing their job, inflicting damage even through the armor. Calling his staff to him using his magnet release, in a split second, he thrusted forward using the curved end to grasp the man's throat and lift him into the air. On his left hand a mini Raizen shuriken formed, which was then flicked into the man's chest, sending him flying away before detonating, creating a massive dome of energy. The dome glowed purple for a few seconds before dispersing. Thanos walked out of the attack, body releasing some smoke, and multiple cuts here and there along with a few bruises on his face, but relatively okay. An interesting attack. He admitted, "It's been a while since someone was able to harm me this much," he added. The Mad Titan raised his gauntlet up and let the stone glow ominously. "It seems I'll have to take this more serious than I anticipated. However, I'll give you one last chance to hand over the stone before I'm forced to take it from you. You know you never did say what you wanted the stones for. Enlighten me," Naruto said, his space stone matching the glow of the Power Stone. "Well, seeing as how you won't be alive much longer, I'll humor you. The universe is overpopulated. Too many mouths, not enough to go around," he began. Naruto nodded his head in agreement that there was too many people with not enough resources. "With the Infinity Stones I can snap my fingers and half the universe will cease to exist. Some would call it genocide, but I call it mercy. Saving them from imminent starvation," he finished. "Right. What about after they're gone? People could just start reproducing again and this problem would repeat itself. See, I have a better idea. With the Infinity Stones I can create unlimited resources. Enough to go around for everyone. I'd end world hunger, war over resources and much more. Which is why I'm going to have to take the stone from you," Naruto said as he spun the staff quickly before slamming it into the ground. "If you do that, all living creatures would depend on one being. They'd stop striving for greater heights. I'd love to continue a philosophical conversation, but I have a universe to balance. I'll be taking the stone," Thanos said as a beam of purple light erupted from the gauntlet. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto spun the staff rapidly in front of him, similar to how he did to Thor, and managed to hold off the attack. Unlike Thor's attack, however, this had a lot more power behind it, as he had to quickly step aside as the attack became too much. Had he held on longer, the staff would have broken. He ducked quickly to avoid a Power Stone enhanced punch before smacking away another fist, returning one of his own. It made contact but didn't stop the Titan. He had to hand it to him. Even in his rusty Six Paths form, the man could still hold his own. He threw a straight right which was caught by Thanos before being hit with an Infinity Stone enhanced left head which sent him flying. The Mad Titan wasn't finished as he rushed forward and once more let off a purple beam of energy from the gauntlet. This time, the beam hit its target. Naruto grit his teeth as his body was no longer in peak condition to handle the Six Paths form at the moment, and the concentrated energy from the Infinity Stone was doing more damage than it should have. He barely managed to leap to the right to avoid an energy blast but was caught by a kick to the chest by the giant. His back hit the solid gold wall of a building which managed to stop him from being sent further. Damn, he's powerful enough on his own. That stone just amplifies his power even more. Gonna have to end this, he thought as he brought his right hand up. On his fingertips 5 different colored spheres materialized, each being a different element combined with a mini Raizen shuriken. He slammed the staff into the ground before tossing the spheres into the portal that had opened. Getting his bearings together, he flew forward and met with the Titan once more. He landed and blocked 2 punches before kicking the man in the chest, sending the man stumbling back slightly. Taking a deep breath, he exhaled it all in one breath, releasing a single line of pressurized air. Thanos saw it coming and managed to duck. Had he turned around, he would have seen pieces of some of the buildings of Asgard being sliced like butter. As he looked up, he noticed the blonde was missing. He realized too late to look behind him as he felt a sharp pain on his spine. The blonde had hit him with the bottom end of the staff right in the center of his back. Even with the special armor, the staff managed to break through and make contact. Naruto saw the Titan drop to a knee as a result of the chakra-enhanced stab to the back and saw it as his best opportunity to end it. He teleported in front of Thanos and delivered a strong enough uppercut to the chin that managed to lift the man into the air. He slammed his staff into the floor and opened a portal above the man. Out of it came the 5 orbs he had previously created. At point-blank range, Thanos didn't have the time to protect himself and could only brace himself for the impact. Not wanting to be caught in the attack, the blonde allowed himself to be pulled backwards into the blue portal and got out of the area. Naruto reappeared a couple thousand feet away where the others were battling Ma. Everyone turned when they felt the ground shake, followed by a big explosion. "So I take it Thanos has been handled, darling?" Hela asked. She noted he had some bruising in the face along with some bits of his armor broken. He spit up a bit of blood. Should be. He's really durable. Took some of my powerful attacks head on and still fought like nothing happened. We'll find out in a few. He asked before looking at a panting Ma who was floating atop of a piece of debris. You guys having trouble with him? He asked as he began to float. It's his telekinesis that's the problem. Thor answered. He has great control over it. Once we get too close he simply levitates and uses the surrounding area against us. Loki answered. He was going to add more when they had to move out of the way of a purple beam. Ma widened his eyes at what he saw and quickly rushed to his master's side. Thanos stood in front of them once more, though not as he had before. The man no longer had most of his upper body armor. Only a small bit remaining on his left shoulder. His helmet all but gone. He was sporting multiple burns along his body and the front of his forearms were cut up so badly you could no longer see his purple skin on them. Master, are you all right? Ma asked as he levitated objects around them to act as protection. Taking a few deep breaths the man replied. I'll live. It seems I greatly underestimated not only his strength but the control he has over the space stone. We're going to have to return for it some other time. This greatly shocked Ma as he'd never seen his master retreat, but he was not one to question orders. Thanos flexed the gauntlet and let off a powerful scream before slamming a fist to the floor. The ground shook and exploded, the shockwave destroying everything in its path courtesy of the Power Stone. Naruto and the group had no choice but to move as to not be hit. In that time Ma and Thanos were beamed back into their ship and quickly began ascending back into the sky. Should we try and stop them? Asked the Valkyrie as they were running. No, answered Naruto. I've reached my limit for now. I've been sealed for too long that my body won't handle my full power at the moment. I can still access my most powerful form but it doesn't do the same damage it used to. We'll have to let them go for now. He'll be back. Finally they turned back and saw that they were in the clear. A large part of Asgard had been turned to rubble but nothing that couldn't be rebuilt. This is bad. Loki began. He'll see you as a major threat now. I'm certain he's going to collect the other stones before saving you for last. Once the other 5-4 are in his possession he'll be almost impossible to deal with. Even if you have a stone. Then we'll have to stop him from getting the others. Or at least beat him to some of them. Hela responded. Do any of you know anyone who might have some information? She asked her brothers. They said nothing for a moment before the god of mischief smiled. Actually yes. Everyone turned to him. As a matter of fact my brother happens to know of a few people who might be able to help us out. Thor's eyes lit up as he knew who his brother was talking about. Yes, Loki is right. He said before turning to one person who seemed really out of place. Banner. Looks like we're going to be meeting with the Avengers. He said happily. Who are the Avengers? Naruto asked in confusion. Having never heard of the group. Hela shrugged her shoulders equally confused. They're Earth's mightiest heroes. Thor replied. They'll be of great help I promise you. All right. So where is this Earth? Naruto asked ready to go. It's Midgard. Hela answered. Oh. We'll have to use the Bifrost then as I don't know exactly where we're going so I can't use the stone. He said. Very well, I don't believe we damaged it during the battle so we should be all set. Let's be off. Thor said as they began walking. As they walked Naruto couldn't help but wonder what kind of beings were in Midgard. If Hela's brothers knew them then they must be powerful. He shook his head of those thoughts. He wrapped his arm around the goddess of death and continued their walk. All he knew was that he had infinity stones to collect as his greatest battle was rapidly approaching. Chapter 4. The group had finally made it down the bridge that led to the Bifrost. Scourge had made good on his word to get the sword that activated the Bifrost earlier. Right before the sword was inserted Loki stepped forward. Wait. He ordered. Everyone's attention turned to him wondering why he stopped them. I just remembered something important. He said with a sly smile. I know where we can get another stone. It's with a man called the Collector. He reveals. Which stone? The blonde asked. The Reality Stone. It has the ability to control and warp reality to a frightening degree. The trickster explained. That could be useful. Last thing we need is to let Big Purple get his hands on that. Naruto said. I'd rather not think of how powerful Thanos could become with it in his possession. Problem is the Bifrost doesn't connect to where he is. We can't get to the Collector without a ship. Thor tells them, frowning slightly. Loki, Naruto says getting the man's attention. Where is this Collector located? He's currently on nowhere. He's keeping it in his museum. I'm positive if we show up and demand the stone he'll hand it over. If not we'll tell him Thanos is coming and he'll take it anyways. I'm sure he'll see it our way. He answered. Nowhere is still around huh? Naruto said, mostly to himself as he'd been there before he was sealed away. Luckily I know where that is. He added before turning to Valkyrie and Bruce. Will you two be joining us? Valkyrie didn't give a verbal response but nodded positive. While they may be on the same side, being in such close proximity to the couple made her all sorts of nervous. One didn't forget the kind of power the carefree man had. And you? He asked the man. Banner stayed quiet for a minute thinking it over. He took a quick look at Thor before making up his mind. I think it'd be better to send me back to Earth. Thor nodded at this and followed up. I agree. You can fill our friends back on Earth in on what's going on. Warn them of the upcoming battle. He motioned Bruce to walk forward. Bruce stood tall and waited for the bridge to connect. Once ready, a great bright light erupted and propelled him forward before shutting off. All right. Banner has been sent back to New York. He'll fill the Avengers in on what's going on. The more allies we have, the better. The God of Thunder says. Naruto nods. All right, let's go see the Collector. He slams his staff down, opening a blue portal in front of the group. As they're walking through, Naruto turns to his wife. Don't you want to stay and run Asgard? This shouldn't take too long. They can make do without me. Once we come back I'll begin renovations on this place. She answered before stepping forward. Shrugging, the rest followed suit, the portal closing behind them. The group reappeared out of the portal on the severed head of a celestial being, now known as Nowhere. Naruto and Hela looked around, taking in the sight. This place had sure changed since the last time they'd seen it. The couple didn't have time for sightseeing though, as Loki began walking forward, knowing exactly where they needed to go. We got lucky you teleported us here. We're not that far away. Loki informed them as they walked. The group walked for half an hour before finally reaching their destination. A giant glass-domed building located almost in the center of nowhere. It's here. The blonde alerted the group. He didn't know exactly how he knew, but he got the same feeling now as he did when he noticed the blue cube after being freed. Naruto found it somewhat strange that there seemed to be no security, but hey, he wasn't complaining. The group entered the building and the blonde couldn't help but be amazed at some of the things he saw. This collector sure had some cool display pieces. As they headed deeper into the building they finally began hearing noises other than their own footsteps. Walking a bit further in they heard a voice. Well, what a surprise. The group looked to their right to see a man walking their way. The man had on some interesting clothing, as he wore a red shirt with a white fur coat above it. He had matching white hair as well as a black line running down the center of his mouth. The three children of Odin. He says, noticing Hela with them. The two brothers were surprised that the collector knew of their sister when they themselves didn't until recently. A Valkyrie. He said, noticing the woman before finally turning his attention to the blonde. As well as Hela's husband Naruto Uzumaki. The collector finished. Naruto smiled. You know my name? He asked rhetorically. I'm honored, he added. Finally someone knew of him. No. The honor is mine. The collector returned. It's not every day you get to meet someone as powerful as yourself. Naruto was now beaming in pride and was about to respond but was cut off. All right, that's enough. I don't need him getting a bigger head. She said. She knew this would get to the man's head if it continued. They needed to get back on track. You have something we need. She finished. At this Naruto moved his hand down the staff enough to display the glowing blue gem. Seeing the collector's eyes on the stone, Thor spoke. The mad titan Thanos is on a quest to obtain the Infinity Stones. We can't allow that to happen. The collector nodded slowly before rubbing his chin. The mad titan, you say? Yes, I've heard whispers that the man has been visiting planets, wiping out half the population. It's been going on for a while now. I figured he was looking for something. Now it all makes sense. He said softly. Seeing that the man knew what was going on, Thor continued. We need the ether. Thanos is coming and we can't let him have the stone. The collector exhaled softly before looking at them. I'm sorry, but I can't just give one of the most powerful objects in the universe away. Not for free, at least. He finished. Looks like we'll need another way to convince him then. Loki said, smiling mischievously. How about this then? Naruto began, you can give us the ether and keep your life. Or you can try and take your chances with Thanos when he comes looking for you, in which case you'll most likely die a painful death. Either way you're gonna hand it over. So what will it be? As he finished his ultimatum the group surrounded the man waiting for an answer. The collector looked around at all of them, seemingly unfazed. However, if one were to look into his mind they'd see how nervous he actually was. He couldn't think of anyone who could take this group on at once and win. Very well. He conceded. The man walked back to a desk and pressed some buttons before a secret compartment opened from said desk. Reaching down he pulled out a black and red box before presenting it to the group. As Naruto was about to reach for it though, he pulled it back. I do have one condition. I want your word that I'll be protected from the Mad Titan when he comes. Naruto smiled before reaching into one of the compartments of his armor. Pulling his hand out, he revealed a three-pronged kunai. Deal. When he comes, just throw this on the ground. It'll let me know you need me, and with the space stone I'll be here. There was another use for that, but I never got around to actually mastering the technique required for it. He told him. The collector took the kunai, inspecting the script on it before nodding and placing it on his desk. With that being done, he presented the box to the blonde. Not wasting time, the blonde took the box before raising it up to eye level. He could feel the presence of the stone. It seemed like the box was a medium for the stone as the cube was for the space stone. Holding the box with both hands, he began pushing large amounts of chakra into it. The box began to glow a brighter red, and soon the entire building began to rumble. Almost there, he thought to himself. This one was a little more difficult than the cube, but it would break all the same. Soon the place shook as the box finally had enough. A bright red light filled the museum, followed by a loud explosion that managed to crack a few windows of the display pieces. When everything settled, the box was no longer present. Instead, a single red stone rested on the palm of the blonde's hand. You've done well, Loki, complimented Hela as she admired the stone. Even she could feel the power this stone possessed. Unlike the space stone, this one had a stronger aura. Bringing the staff close to the stone, Naruto quickly slammed the stone just underneath the space stone. The staff began glowing red with some bits of blue as it integrated itself into the staff. The glowing lights quickly went down the staff, into the blonde's arms before going up near his head. Naruto gripped the staff harder, threw his head back, and inhaled deeply as the power began coursing through him. Seconds later it calmed down and he allowed himself to exhale. That was a rush, he commented. The collector was looking at the blonde wide-eyed before his attention went to the staff. Amazing, he whispered to himself. Not once have I seen someone wield more than one stone at a time. Truly amazing. He finished. Naruto stared at the stone. Alright, let's see if you're the real deal. He slammed the base of his staff to the ground and immediately a thin red veil appeared seemingly out of thin air, moving across the entire room. All people present followed the red veil as it moved and quickly noticed the scenery around them changing. They were no longer in the collector's museum. It looked like they were no longer on Nowhere. Where are we? Thor asked as he walked forward, feeling the buildings around them and touching the floor to make sure it was real. He patted a building wall a few times before taking another look around. They seemed to be in some sort of village by the looks of it. Off in the distance he could see a giant stone monument with several faces carved into it. Hela too noticed the monument and immediately spotted a familiar face among them. This is your home, she pointed out. Yeah, he said softly before cutting off the stone's flow of power. The red veil appeared before them, moving backwards once again, revealing the collector's museum. Well, we got what we needed. A pleasure meeting you, collector. As agreed, if you need me you know how to get me. Let's go, he said as he activated the space stone and teleported everyone away. As they arrived back in Bifrost in Asgard, Naruto chuckled. What's so funny? Loki asked. I can only imagine how mad Thanos will be when he finds out I beat him to the stone, he said and continued laughing. Loki chuckled nervously before walking with Thor to the sword that activated the Bifrost. Our family just seems to get crazier, he commented. Our new brother-in-law seems to find amusement in upsetting one of the most powerful beings in the universe, he added, shaking his head. Thor laughs before taking a look over at the blonde who was talking with Hela. I agree, he's a strange one. But he's powerful, there's no denying that. We'll have to get used to it, brother, he said before getting everyone's attention. Alright, we need to head for New York. I'm not sure how much time has passed on Earth while we were in Nowhere, but we need to regroup with Banner and the Avengers, he ordered. I'll be staying behind this time, Hela said as she began walking towards the bridge back to the city. Since Certus and Thanos managed to wreck a large portion of Asgard, my powers have taken a hit. We must begin reconstruction at once, she clarified. I'll be staying as well, added the Valkyrie. Now that I'm here on Asgard again, there's some things I need to tend to, she said before heading out. Naruto nodded in agreement, as did the rest of the group. I'll close the Bifrost, Hela said. Maybe this time we'll make it through peacefully, Loki commented looking at his sister. Hela just smirked at him before giving Naruto a peck on the mouth and sending them on their way. Once gone, the goddess of death began her trek back to Asgard. Now where is Scourge? She asked out loud. The two brothers and their brother-in-law were content to take their trip through the Bifrost in peace and quiet. That was until Naruto realized this was the first time he was with the two while not fighting. He figured this would be a good time to connect with Hela's brothers. So, what are your hobbies? He asked, trying to make conversation. Thor and Loki looked at each other wondering where that came from before Loki realized what was going on. He chuckled, "It's fine, we really don't have to do this." The blonde was going to object, but they had reached their destination. When the light died, Naruto looked around and was going to ask where they were but was beaten to the punch by Loki. "Why did we end up in the middle of a bunch of trees of all places?" Didn't want to scare the public by appearing in the center of the city. Besides, the Avengers headquarters isn't far from here. Thor explained. "Can you use your magic to change our clothing, brother?" This was a cakewalk for Loki. His magic was beyond powerful. Asking if he could change their clothing was almost insulting, but he didn't comment on it and simply did as requested. His brother now had a tan jacket over a black sweater and black pants. Loki went with a more sophisticated approach and wore an all-black suit. After all, showing up in New York with his armor on might slightly upset the citizens. "So which one of you two is dressed normally here?" Naruto asked. He hadn't been to Midgard in so long he didn't know how they dressed. He looked to Loki and decided he'd take a page from his book. All that time he spent around Hela, and the color black really began to stick with him. He used the reality stone to change his clothing to resemble that of Loki's. The staff was also now hidden from sight to anyone but himself. If one were to look at him, they wouldn't see the staff. "All right, Thor, lead the way," the blonde said. Thor nodded and began walking off. As they exited the woods, Naruto looked around and noticed there wasn't much around except one building. It seemed to be more of a compound, heavily guarded, as there was people surrounding the area. Thor stopped walking and turned to his two colleagues. "All right, you guys stay here. I'm going to go meet up with the team and let them know the two of you are here. Whatever you do, don't move," he stressed before walking off. Loki looked over at the blonde for a second before hatching up a plan. "Say, Naruto," he said, getting his attention. "Thor is always so uptight. I think he needs to loosen up, don't you think?" he asked. Naruto looked to where Thor had went and remembered every conversation he had with the god. Sure enough, he was mostly all business and fighting. "Yeah, I agree. How funny do you think it would be if we just appeared inside their headquarters before giving Thor could tell them why he brought us here?" Loki asked again, a glint appearing in his eyes. Naruto's eyes widened. "You want to prank Thor?" he asked happily. A nod was his answer. Inside the Avengers headquarters, Thor was walking to the main room where the Avengers usually stayed. Along the way, he was trying to think of exactly how he was going to explain why his brother and a super-powered being were here. Deciding he'd just figure it out as he went, he pushed open the doors and saw Banner, Tony, Rhodes, and a young man he'd never seen before. Kid couldn't have been older than 15. "Thor," Banner said as he stood up from his seat. "Please tell me Thanos hasn't made another move." Thor laughed. "No, my friend, he hasn't. Not that I'm aware of. We, however, have made a move." "And what would that be, Point Break?" "What? No hello?" Tony said as he walked forward. Thor smiled happily as he saw his good friend for the first time in a while. "Stark, good to see you again, my friend," he told the man. He turned to Bruce and asked, "How long have you been here?" "Just a few days. So what is this move you guys made?" Bruce asked. "Oh right. That? Well, we went to visit a man and managed to get another stone," he told them. "Okay, Banner kind of filled me in on the whole guy wants to rule the world scheme, but I'm still missing some information." "Who's we?" Tony asked. Thor was about to reply when he heard two voices he really wished he hadn't. "That would be us," two voices said from besides them. To their left, Naruto and Loki were sitting on some seats, both smiling like they hadn't just ignored what Thor had told them. "Thor, why is your brother here with some guy I've never met?" Tony asked, looking between Loki and Naruto. "Damn you both," Thor whispered under his breath as he looked at the two men. This was not going to go well. He just knew it. Chapter 5. "I thought I told you two to wait outside until I came to get you," Thor said, clearly irritated. "True, brother. You did," Loki agreed, "but it started getting cold out there and we figured it'd be a lot warmer in here." Naruto nodded, agreeing with the black-haired god. Despite not knowing Naruto, not a soul in that building was buying their story for a second. "Okay. Somebody's gonna have to explain what's going on here. Pronto. Come on," Stark said with a clap of his hands. Having one of the most dangerous people the Avengers have fought along with a complete unknown was not something he was comfortable with. Naruto noticed that after the man had clapped, his left hand was creeping closer to some sort of device on his chest. He briefly wondered what exactly that would do. He had to put his thoughts on hold as Thor began doing damage control. "All right. I'm sure all of you know my brother Loki," said brother, flashed a charming smile and waved. He was not surprised to find that no one bothered to wave back. Thor then pointed to Naruto. "This is our brother-in-law Naruto," he introduced. It's Naruto," the blonde clarified. Thor looked at him with a somewhat confused expression. Yes. That's what I said. He replied before continuing. Anyways, these are the Avengers. We have Tony Stark, known to the world as Iron Man, Rhodes known as War Machine. Then, he trailed off as he looked at the young boy. Noticing all the eyes on him, the young man spoke. Oh hey, I'm Peter Parker. Peter walked forward to be polite and shake their hands but was stopped as a hand fell on his shoulder. Don't get too close. One of them has tried to conquer Earth before and the two get along, so he can't be that much better. Tony says, still cautious. Seeing this, Naruto raised his hands up to try and appease the man. I'm not here to conquer anything, alright? He says before wielding the reality stone to display his staff in his hand. Probably not the best idea since everyone not named Thor or Loki immediately got on guard. If I wanted to take over the planet or kill everybody, I could have by now. He added before sliding his hand down slightly, allowing everyone to see two glowing stones. Thor. Tony called, are those what I think they are? He asked, his eyes never leaving the glowing rocks. Thor laughed as he took in everyone's shocked reactions along with the young man's confused one. Yes, my friend. 2 Infinity Stones. The Space Stone as well as the Reality Stone. His voice then took a more serious tone. The Mad Titan Thanos is on a quest to collect all 6 of them. He says he plans of collecting the stones and then using them to decimate half of all living life in the universe. Naruto finished. For the first time, Tony actually looked serious as opposed to apprehensive. And you're trying to keep him from them? He asked, how do we know you can keep those safe? Don't take it the wrong way, but try and look at it from our angle. It doesn't sound smart to let someone we don't know go around collecting Infinity Stones. He explained. Well, he has 2 stones already and so far hasn't killed anyone or taken over the Earth. If he has control over space and reality, I don't think it'd be relatively hard for him to do so. Not that I trust him or anything. Peter said, adding that last part after being given a look from Tony. Well, it's either that or we let Thanos get them. Loki added, currently he's in possession of the Power Stone. If I were to wager, I'd say he's out looking for the rest. No one said anything as they all thought over what they'd just heard. Tony rubbed his chin as he thought things over. 2 people were hunting for the most powerful objects in the universe. There was only one way he could see this ending, and that was in an all-out war. He looked towards Rhodes and Peter before looking at his Asgardian friend. You trust him? He asked. Thor looked over at Naruto, still slightly miffed about being put on the spot earlier, but nods. Yes. He's faced Thanos once already and forced him to retreat. Besides, if Thanos gets the stones, there's the possibility that he wipes out my sister in the process, and I know he won't stand for that. Tony walked over to a cabinet and took out a glass before filling it with some sort of alcoholic beverage. Okay. So 2 stones are here. Thanos has the Power Stone. Vision has the Mind Stone. That leaves 2 stones unaccounted for. Tony explained as he took a drink. Yeah. The Time Stone and the Soul Stone are still unknown. Naruto replied. You said this Vision person has the Mind Stone, where is he? If he could convince the man to hand it over, it would be a huge advantage. Tony shakes his head, we don't know. He and Wanda haven't been seen in a while. Perhaps the others know where Vision is. Thor offered. Bruce looked uncomfortable as he stepped forward. Actually, about that. The Avengers have disbanded. He told him. Bruce went on to reiterate the events that happened while the two were off-planet. Everything from the Sokovia Accords to the disbanding of the Avengers when Tony and Captain America along with Bucky went at it. In the end, nobody won. The Avengers disbanded and one of my friends was critically injured. He said, motioning to Rhodes. The mood was solemn as those who were there were forced to remember the battle. Loki, however, leaned his head over towards Naruto. Sounds to me like Captain America won. He said quietly. Naruto had to stifle down a laugh as he knew now wasn't the time to let Loki make him laugh. He coughs quietly to get himself under control before speaking. Alright, so there's 3 stones missing at the moment. I have a sneaking suspicion that Thanos may know where the Soul Stone is, so he's most likely going there. Naruto told them. Do you have any way of getting in touch with the rest of the Avengers? He asked Tony. Tony looked uncomfortable and looked away, not answering. Tony, do you have a way to contact Steve and the others? Bruce asked once more. Tony reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone before muttering, yeah. You have to call them, Tony. We need help. He continued. Seeing Tony not budge on the matter, he got a bit angry. Tony. Every living thing in this universe is at stake. Put your pride aside and make the call. It's not that simple. Even if we did manage to get them to help us, the government will still recognize them as criminals. They'd be arrested on sight. Tony replied as he looked at the phone. Damn it, Tony. Bruce muttered. These accords really screwed it up for them. As if reading his mind, Naruto spoke up. Not gonna lie Stark, these accords you were all for were a stupid idea. Is there any way to overturn it? He asked. No. The accords were ratified by over 100 countries. It could take years to get them to agree to terminate them. Rhodes informed them. Naruto was going to speak but stopped as he felt something. He turned his head to the right looking out the window before he felt a light pull again. What's wrong? Thor asked. I'll be right back. Naruto muttered before tapping his staff on the floor and disappeared into the blue portal. Everyone looked to where Naruto once stood wondering just where he went. By any chance is there anything to eat around here? Loki asked. Everyone glanced at him but said nothing. The blonde reappeared in the middle of a city. The strange thing was that it was night time. He looked around and noticed pieces of some of the nearby buildings on the ground. Clearly a battle had taken place here recently. As he was looking around he heard an explosion a few blocks away. Once again he disappeared into the portal and reappeared where he heard the explosion from. He appeared inside a building on the top floor and watched as a battle took place below him. He noticed two alien-like figures that looked similar to the ones that had come with Thanos during their last encounter. The bigger figure had a scepter in his hand and was trying to either kill or capture a red humanoid figure. That's when he saw it. A yellow stone situated at the center of the man's forehead. So that's vision. He said to himself. He was expecting a man to be using the stone, not a man being kept alive by the stone. Fighting alongside him was a woman who seemed to have some sort of telekinetic powers. A blonde martial artist woman and finally a bearded man with a dark blue suit with a star on his chest. Currently the man was holding back a spear from taking his head off while the others were fighting the woman. Looks like it was time to step in. The moment his feet touched the ground everyone stopped what they were doing to see who had shown up. Are you two with Thanos? Naruto asked. The woman looked at him before looking at his staff noticing the two stones. She didn't answer and simply pressed a button on her forearm and her companion were engulfed in a blue light before they were taken away. Naruto looked at the remaining people before walking forward. As expected most of them tensed up, all except the one with the star. He stood still, didn't look fazed but was clearly ready for anything. Naruto could respect that. Who are you? Asked the telekinetic girl as his hands glowed red. He noticed that a red hue had begun to appear around him as he was lifted into the air. Everyone watched in confusion as the blonde seemed to turn into red particles of light before he disappeared. Now no need for all of that. They heard from behind them. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I'm a friend of Thor's. He told them as he realized if they were with Vision they must be the other members of the Avengers. He would have said Loki but chances are he wasn't too popular with them either. Finally one of them stepped forth. I'm Steve Rogers. You said you're a friend of Thor? He asked. Friend, brother-in-law, take your pick. Just to make sure I'm talking to the right person, you're Captain America, right? Of the Avengers? Naruto asked to make sure. You have me at a disadvantage. You seem to know who I am but you're unfamiliar to me. Cap replied. I actually just learned about you a couple minutes ago. I was talking with Tony Stark and Bruce about past events when I felt a spike of energy which I'm now sure was the Infinity Stone inside your head. He said pointing at Vision at the end. Which I'm assuming they wanted to take. Captain America was going to ask how he was sure it was the stone but stopped as he finally noticed the stones. From the angle where he was he hadn't seen them when he forced the two aliens to retreat. They were indeed here for the mid-stone. What are your intentions? Vision asked. Originally I was going to ask the wielder of the stone to hand it over but it looks like that stone is what's keeping you alive. He answered. The blonde woman stepped forward, a frown on her face. Okay, hold on. You said you were with Thor, where is he? She asked. He's back at the Avengers headquarters. We need your help. He told them, though he was now looking at Cap as he seemed to be the leader. Help with what exactly? Cap replied. It's a pretty long story, how about we talk about this elsewhere? He could see the hesitance in their eyes, and he couldn't blame them. He was a complete stranger who suddenly came to their aid and had two Infinity Stones in his possession, one of which he was familiar with. Alright, how about I go get Thor if it'll make you guys a bit more at ease? He asked. Without giving them a chance to reply the blonde summoned a portal behind him and disappeared. He reappeared back at Avengers HQ and quickly scanned the room for the Asgardian. Thor, I need you to come with me for a while. Your friends aren't exactly trusting me right now. He told the man. Thor nodded and downed his beer he had been drinking before standing up. Hold it. Tony said. If Thor is going so is Loki. I don't know if he's turned over a new leaf or whatever but I'm not risking him staying here. The god of mischief just smiled, glad he could still get Iron Man on edge. Alright fine. It'll make it a little more difficult but I can manage. Let's go. With that the three men disappeared from the room. Back with Captain and his team, they all began to wonder what was going on. The blonde had told them that they needed the help of the Avengers but hadn't been specific. His thoughts were cut off as the blonde returned again, this time with two familiar faces in tow, one of which they were not so happy to see. Immediately they were on guard as Loki stepped forward with Thor. "Captain." Thor greeted with a smile, "It's good to see you again. Worry not about Loki, he will cause you no trouble." They looked skeptical but trust his judgment. "Thor, it's good to see you," Cap replied before pulling the Asgardian in for a hug. An action that was mimicked by everyone at the scene. "I'm sure you have some questions. All of which I'll be more than happy to answer. A warning, it's not a good situation we've found ourselves in. I wanted you to come to the Avengers headquarters to discuss the recent events, but I've been told you're not allowed," he said with a frown. "They may not be allowed at the HQ, but I know somewhere we can talk," Naruto said as he opened a portal and stepped aside, motioning them in with his hand. Loki was the first to enter, not even looking back. The rest followed after being reassured that he could be trusted. Captain America looked around in both wonder and confusion at the semi-ruined city the blonde man had taken them to. All around he could see people working together to rebuild damaged buildings and streets. He looked up at some of the ones that were intact and was in awe at how much gold lined the city. "Welcome, friends, to Asgard," Thor announced, "or what's left of it at least. Come." It was about a minute walk before they entered a giant palace, gold lining almost every part of it. Though the deeper they got into it, the more rubble they found. Finally they reached what Cap would guess to be the throne room. He had some knowledge on Norse mythology, and the person sitting on the throne did not look like Odin. Instead he saw a woman in a black and green skin-tight suit sitting cross-legged looking over a book. He quickly hurried his pace to walk alongside Thor and whispered, "Isn't Odin supposed to be sitting there? Father passed away not too long ago." The man replied solemnly, "I'm sorry for your loss." He too knew what it was like to lose people important to him. "But shouldn't the throne go to you as his heir?" He followed up. "Yes, but my sister and I came to an agreement and it was decided she would be the new ruler of Asgard," he told her. Steve turned his attention back to the woman and remembered what the blonde had told him. He had introduced himself as both Thor's friend and brother-in-law. He hadn't known Thor had a sister. "We're back," Naruto announced as he walked up the stairs to the throne to greet his wife. She looks up from her book and greets him with a kiss before looking back at them with a seemingly uninterested look. "So you are?" She didn't ask, but he knew her well enough to know she was curious about the others. He stood to her right. "These are Thor's allies from Midgard," he said. Steve, being the ever-polite one, walked forward and nodded. "Your Highness," he greeted. The others followed suit but didn't speak. Hela raised an eyebrow and smirked at the display. Naruto had to hold back a groan as he knew this would do wonders for her ego. "I like this one," she said looking at Steve. "Has Thor or my husband told you what's going on?" she asked him, seeing him as the leader of the group. "Not yet," Cap replied. "We were brought here to get some answers, darling," she tells Naruto. Nodding, he begins to fill them in the same way he did with Stark and the others. It took well over half an hour to relay everything to them, stopping occasionally to answer questions from the group. "That's why they came for the stone," Vision commented. "How many are left?" Steve asked, referring to the stones. "2. The Time Stone as well as the Soul Stone," Thor answered. "We've come to the conclusion that Thanos must have an idea of where the Soul Stone is located and is heading to retrieve it as we speak. This is bad," Natasha said, finally contributing to the conversation. "From what you've told us, it doesn't sound like he'll just sit back and allow you to keep the stones out of his reach. He'll target you again. This time he'll be stronger if he has another stone," she added. "He has an army. Loki told them, when I invaded Earth, Thanos was the one who gave me the Chitauri. He has thousands under his command. Soon he'll call them to help him retrieve the stones. We'll be greatly outnumbered. Even with the Avengers as well as yourselves, we can't take on an entire army along with a man wielding Infinity Stones," Vision commented. "We'll need a lot more help." Steve, having been quiet, nods to himself. "I think I know where we can get it," he said before looking at Naruto. "Do you know where Wakanda is?" Chapter 6. No, that's a bit after my time. I've been sealed up for a long time. Who knows, though, it might have been around if it's really well hidden. If you know where it is, though, I can get you there," Naruto told Cap. "I have a way to contact an ally there. If you can drop us off in East Africa, we can take care of the rest from there." The blonde closed his eyes as he tried to picture a map of Midgard in his head. East Africa. It's just that giant land mass, correct? Mostly dirt? The short blonde woman of the group was the one who spoke next. "It's not all like that, but for the most part, yes. That's the one." Naruto was about to say something to Thor but stopped when he noticed the bearded man's eye. Or rather the charred remains of what was once his eye. He looked at it before looking back to his wife with a blank look on his face. "What is it?" the queen asked with an almost unnoticeable smirk. She knew what he was about to ask. "What is it with you and trying to gouge people's eyes out? You did that to at least 10 people every time we were in a battle." He shook his head in exasperation before focusing on Thor. "Thor! Stand still!" he commanded. The son of Odin frowned but did as he was told. The group watched in varying degrees of shock as he placed his hand over the injured eye, and within seconds it began healing. The damaged skin began regaining its color, and once he removed his hand, a perfectly working eye was staring back at him. "Sorry, that's been bugging me for a minute now," the blonde commented casually, as if he hadn't just regenerated another person's body part with ease. Clapping his hands, he turned back to a still shocked Captain America. "All right. Wakanda. What's there and how can it help us?" Breaking out of his stupor, the former de facto leader of the Avengers answered. "The leader is an ally. He has an entire nation under his command. They have some of the most advanced technology and their army can greatly boost our numbers. If Thanos really has that many people under his command, we'll need every soldier we can get." Naruto nodded. "This would definitely help. All right, are the others with you going as well, or should I take them back?" Cap glanced at the rest, all of whom nodded back at him. "They'll come with me. If you don't mind me asking though, what are you gonna do?" "You should try and recruit powerful allies back on Midgard." Thor pitched in. "That's not a bad idea," Naruto admitted. "I'll ask Stark if he knows anyone else that could lend us a hand. Lord knows we're gonna need it." He raised his staff, ready to summon a portal, when he suddenly stopped and turned to his wife. "Why don't you come with me?" Seeing her give him a look, he pointed the staff at Thor. "He can stay here and keep things under control while you're gone. The people seem to like him and will most likely work better if he's the one who tells them to. Loki will stay here too." "And why do I have to come along?" she asked. "Yes, and for that matter, why do I have to stay here as well?" Loki added. "Because it'll be fun. We've been unsealed and we're about to fight in another war. Might as well enjoy ourselves while we can," he replied to Hela before turning to the god of mischief. "As for why you gotta stay here, in case you guys get attacked again, it'll be better for Thor to have backup of your caliber than by himself." Hela sighed. He was right. As much as she wanted to take her rightful place on the throne, they were going to be battling once again soon. "Fine, I suppose you're right. Thor, you're in charge of this place while I'm gone. Do try not to damage the place any more than you already have." To which the god of thunder just gave her a blank look. One that the blonde also gave her. Ignoring the two, she walked up alongside him. Finally Naruto turned his attention to Vision, more specifically he turned his attention to the yellow infinity stone in his forehead. He stared at the stone before beginning to make his way to him. The others, though they knew he was an ally now, couldn't help but tense up as he made his way. "So this is keeping you alive?" Vision nodded. "That is correct. The Mind Stone powers me. If what we've been told is true, then Thanos will most definitely be targeting me soon." "I wouldn't say soon. I have reality and space, you have the mind, and Thanos has the Power Stone. That only leaves time and soul. My guess is he's gonna go for the Soul Stone first. Unless he knows where they are, which is doubtful, he'll be occupied for a while." Naruto reassured. "How do you figure that?" Steve asked. "If he knew where they were, he'd already have them in his gauntlet when he arrived on Asgard. We have some time. When I finish my business on Midgard, I'll try and use the Reality Stone to create an alternative power source for you in order to take the stone. Sending you into battle with a stone in your head is a bad idea." With his piece said, he tapped the staff on the ground, willing the dark blue portal to open. Captain America and his team walked through after a quick reassurance from Thor, followed by the blonde and the queen. The group reappeared in what seemed to be the wilderness. Contrary to what the blonde thought, they were surrounded by bodies of water and grass. "Did I get it right?" Naruto asked Steve as he looked around. "I think you're a little off," the blonde woman, Natasha, said as she pointed to the surface of one of the bodies of water. "I see a hippo's head." "Well, it's probably a whole hippo, just that the rest of it is under the water," Steve replied, amused at the looks he got from his friends. "You teleported us to the Okavango Delta in Botswana," Natasha continued. "But is this Africa?" Naruto asked. "Well, yes, it's Africa, just not East Africa. We're a little south. It's fine though, I can contact him from here," Cap replied as he went in for a handshake with their new ally. "Do you have a way we can communicate with you?" The blonde returned the handshake but shook his head. "Not really, I just teleport to whoever I need. We'll get something for you to get in touch with us from Wakanda." "Sounds good. Just let off a small amount of power from the stone and I'll be able to sense it and come to you should you need me," he replied before turning back to Hela. Come on dear, let's go ask Stark if he has any leads of potential allies. The crew watched as the man and woman disappeared into another portal, leaving them alone in the wilderness. Once they were gone, Natasha was the first to speak. Was it just me or was anyone else afraid the Queen was going to try and kill us all? Her stare was somewhat imposing, but I don't believe she means us any harm, at the moment. Vision answered. Cap nodded, she definitely has a powerful presence. So does Naruto. I can't believe he's actually married to her. How do they work considering his personality is almost the opposite of hers? She wondered. Her question went unanswered as Steve took out his communication device he had received from the king. Avengers HQ. The two deities appeared in the same spot the blonde had taken off from when he sensed the Mind Stone go off. Naruto noticed the one called Rhodes was missing from the room, leaving only Stark, Bruce, and Peter Parker. He didn't dwell on it for too long though as Stark finally noticed them. He's back. And look, he's brought company. Tony announced to Peter. Naruto nodded happily, I have. Everyone meet my wife Hela, the Queen of Asgard. Peter began to kneel but was stopped by Tony who lightly smacked him in the back of the head. Come on kid, get up. So where are Thor and the others? Thor and Loki stayed in Asgard. The other half of your former team is on their way to talk to an ally Captain America is familiar with. Says they can really help us out. So why did you decide to come back here? Bruce asked before realizing who he was talking to and how it sounded. Not that we don't want you back or anything. Waving off his indirect apology he replied, Thor said Midgard still has plenty of mighty heroes that could potentially assist us. He figured if anyone knew who we could recruit it would be you. Actually we were just talking about that. There are some people whose help would be invaluable. Bruce told him before looking at Tony to explain. Hela, who'd been amusing herself by staring at Peter until he looked away in discomfort, clapped her hand twice. Well? Who are these people you know of? Tony walked over to another part of the room and began pouring himself a drink. He pulled a device out of his pocket and placed it on the small bar face up. Soon a blue light shot up before an image appeared in midair. The hologram showed the image of an older-looking bald man. Two other people appeared next to the man before Tony began speaking. Dr. Charles Xavier. Possesses powerful telepathic powers. He founded an institution dedicated to helping young people with supernatural abilities control their powers. Something to note is that they refer to people with powers as mutants. He explained, taking down the image of the man. Next he pointed to the woman. Aurora Monroe. One of his most trusted friends and a member of the team he created known as the X-Men. She has the ability to control weather patterns to a frightening degree. Hence her alias, Storm. Like Xavier, her picture was also taken down, leaving only one person left. Finally we have Logan. He trailed off trying to think. Well, he has a lot of abilities actually. It'd be a bore to go over all of them. He took a sip of his drink and then continued, if you can convince Dr. Xavier to help us out we'll have a greater chance of survival considering how many more superpowered people he knows. Naruto rubbed his chin in thought, taking in all the information he'd been given. Where can I find this Dr. Westchester County, New York. I'll give you the exact address. It's not too far from here. The genius told him as he began writing down the directions on a piece of paper. Peter, who'd tried to stay out of the conversation, finally spoke up. Do you guys think it's a good idea to go like that? Naruto looked down at himself before looking at Hela and then back to the youth. What do you mean? Well, you're in a black suit, which is okay I guess. Your wife though? He stopped briefly when Hela narrowed her eyes at him and raised her head, silently warning him that his words better be chosen carefully. She's in full-on battle armor, which might attract a bit of attention. Naruto nodded. The kid had a point. Looking around the room he noticed a small magazine next to where he and Loki had been sitting when they showed up. Picking it up he flipped through a few pages and put it back down. He tapped his staff on the ground lightly, the reality stone glowing a bright red indicating it's being activated. His clothes began to change into a similar outfit as a man he'd seen on a page. He now wore black jeans, and a dark blue pullover hoodie with a white logo that read Nike on it. He didn't know what a Nike was, but it looked alright. Similar to him, Hela's clothes had also changed from her black and green battle armor into skin-tight black jeans with a dark green zip-up hoodie that she filled in quite nicely. There we go. Naruto said, happy with his work. He walked over to Tony and grabbed the piece of paper with the address on it. We'll be back once we have them on board. With that the two disappeared into the void the space stone created. I don't think Naruto knows how to tell directions on Earth. So where exactly did he just teleport them to? Bruce asked, concern lacing into his voice. Both he and Peter turned to Tony, who just stared back at them and shrugged. I'm sure they'll be fine. All they have to do is find Dr. Xavier, explain the situation and job done. Trust me, they can't mess this up. Both Bruce and Peter glanced at each other and their faces showed the same expression. Doubt. XXXXXXXXXX. Do you know where we are? Hela asked a little louder than normal. It can't be too far from here and it's a mansion. There's probably people flying around it and whatnot. We'll find it easily. For now let's just enjoy the sights. He replied just as loud. Why were they speaking with louder than normal voices? It has something to do with where they appeared when they stepped out of the portal. Where did they appear? On the freeway. Luckily it was one of those times where it was relatively empty, at least on their side. The other side had cars blasting through it creating a lot of noise. Just as he uttered the words, enjoy the sights, he noticed something in his peripheral vision coming at them. A metal box coming at them at relatively fast speeds. Before he could act however, the object seemed to lose control and hit the side of the freeway and began swerving left to right before ultimately flipping over. The married couple looked up just as it was flipping over them. They both blinked in confusion when a man stuck his head out of the top. He had a red mask with black accents around the eyes and white pupil-less spots where the eyes would go and no mouth. The masked man looked down at them and tilted his head in what appeared to be confusion or curiosity. Oh. Hello, he said before going back inside. They watched as it crashed nearby and the masked man was the only one to step out. Well, I think we're on the right track. Hela said as she took in the rest of the man's appearance. Naruto was going to reply but stopped as his senses told him something was coming. Turning around he saw another one making its way at them. Activating his magnet release he raised an arm and waved his hand up and down. If he could see the people inside he was sure they'd have a look of fear as they levitated before crashing back down. Unlike the other vehicle, 6 goons ran out of the car with what he would guess were weapons drawn and pointed at them. Before they even had a chance to attack however 3 of them were stabbed in the throat by small knives courtesy of Hela. The remaining 3 watched in shock as their cohorts were dropped without trouble. Shaking out of it they began firing only to have their eyes widen as their bullets stopped in mid-air before dropping uselessly on the ground. They weren't given the chance to attack again however as a red blur flew over them, landing behind the soon-to-be dead goons. The masked man made quick work decapitating one while simultaneously stabbing another in the stomach. Pulling the blade out he flung it with impressive accuracy in between the last man's eyes. The man in black and red wiped the blood off of his blade on the shirt of the now deceased man and made his way over to the pair. Hey there. You guys are new, I don't think you're supposed to be in this movie, are you? He asked. The blonde walked up. Hey. I'm Naruto and this is Hela. As for your question, I'm not really sure what you're talking about. Anyways, you wouldn't happen to know where I can find Charles Xavier, do you? McAvoy or Stewart? These timelines get really confusing. Naruto glanced at Hela who shrugged. Stewart. You know where he is? It turned out to be the right answer as the man nodded. Yeah, I know where to find him. He's over at that giant mansion of his. I was worried he sent you guys to try and get me to join his little team. I keep telling that giant if I ever decide to become a crime-fighting shit swizzler who rooms with a bunch of other little whiners at Neverland Mansion with some creepy, old, bald, Heaven's Gate-looking motherfucker, I'll send them a friend request. The man ranted. Oh, you can call me Ryan, I mean Deadpool. Naruto was about to nod at the introduction when he sensed something was a bit off with the man. Are you injured? Deadpool nodded. Yup, I'm all sorts of fucked up underneath this costume. To prove his point he removed his mask which revealed to them the badly burned face of the man. Yeah, I got fucked up by some assholes, I got healing abilities but can't heal from this. Fucked up, right? Naruto nodded, taking in the appearance. Hold still. Deadpool didn't get to ask why as Naruto put his palm on the man's forehead and all became clear. The burned skin began changing, smoothing out to match everyone else's. The man's hair began growing back instantly, which in Hela's opinion was rather disgusting to see. Within 10 seconds the man looked like he had a while back. Naruto walked over to the wreckage and picked up a piece of the broken mirror from the vehicle and threw it to Deadpool who caught it easily. After taking a moment to observe himself he turned back to the blonde and said the only thing on his mind. You're fucking Jesus, aren't you? Chapter 7. Thank you, I understand all of you wish to be saved but we really must get going. Deadpool apologized while holding stacks of money that had been handed to him. The man put his hand on Naruto's back and lightly pushed him in a different direction and by extension Hela as well. Here's your cut by the way. The red-costumed man told him, handing him a large stack of green bills. Naruto held the paper up to eye level and took in every detail of what he figured was their currency. Seeing as all of them were basically the same he folded them in half and stuffed them into one of his pockets. This pattern had repeated several times over the past half hour now. The man would tell people if they'd heard about their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Deadpool would then ask Naruto to do something trivial like changing one substance to another, which usually resulted with crowds of people crying hysterically. Why do you continue to use the reality stone to turn water into alcohol? Hela asked. The people will cry every time and then crowd around us like animals, she said with distaste. Besides, it only seems to egg him on more. The two were following closely behind him as he led them down the streets of the city, only half paying attention to whatever he was rambling on about at the moment. Naruto wasn't too interested in whatever this timeline he kept going on about was. No, he was more curious as to how Deadpool came to be. From what he picked up from the man's stories, there were people who were born with supernatural abilities. That wasn't too big of a surprise. He was from a place where people could bend the elements to their wills, distort reality to a degree, and resurrect the dead. What was surprising was that not everyone was viewed the same way because of it. The people here were referred to as mutants, a subclass of humans that even had slightly different DNA. In their DNA they had what was known as a mutant gene that granted them a supernatural ability. It seemed that Deadpool had been injected with a serum that was supposed to activate a dormant mutant gene, and it worked. A little too well. He suffered from a form of cancer, and his newfound healing factor made both his normal cells and cancer cells unable to die, which resulted in his former appearance. Luckily for the man, it wasn't anything he couldn't fix. And even now they continue to bug me to join. Mostly the big guy, but they all fall under the same umbrella. Deadpool finished his latest story. Both Naruto and Hela glanced over to the man who, despite being healed, still wore the mask over his head. Maybe it was a hidden identity type thing? Hela's annoyed look returned in full force, which didn't seem to faze the man at all. He loves hearing himself speak, doesn't he? It's clear he's not all that there. Seriously, in the small time that they'd been together, he hadn't stopped talking. It was tolerable the first minute they met, but the moment Naruto used what Deadpool had dubbed a Jesus miracle, he'd pestered them to no end. He inquired about their other abilities like a child who just discovered something new. Can you walk on water? Can you turn water into wine, etc., etc.? It didn't help that the answers to most of his questions were yes. Without unwrapping her arm from his, she spoke again. You just had to humor him, didn't you? Naruto chuckled. He knew his wife was quick to annoy, having been on the receiving side of her snarky comments and attitude multiple times over the years. I like him, he's funny. Having been sealed away for so long, it's a breath of fresh air. The closest thing I've had to amuse me since we were freed is your brother Loki, he said, referring to them messing with Thor when they went to speak to Tony Stark. Hela raised an eyebrow at his statement. So you're saying our time together after being freed wasn't to your liking? That was pleasurable. I hadn't been able to make love to my wife in a long time, so believe me, I loved every minute of it. I mean it more in the sense of being amused by something. I know what you meant. I can see how the two of you would get along. She responded with a rare smile as she stared up at him for a moment. Not at the thought of Loki, mind you, no, his way of speaking reminded her a bit too much of Odin for her liking. The thoughts of their time together on Asgard before everything went down entered her mind. From the moment she met him, he was always looking for ways to amuse himself, whether it be hijinks with the others or making remarks that only he found funny. Even she found herself amused at times before battles when he would say something completely nonchalantly in a tense room. She'd never admit it out loud, but she knew that even if he weren't as powerful as he is, she'd have still allowed him to get close and most likely married him. Her improving mood was ruined when she noticed the masked man staring at her. Even though the mask had no mouth, she could just tell he was smiling like an idiot under that mask. Great, he'd caught her making eyes at her husband. Insect, she called out, referring to Deadpool. How much longer until we arrive? We're just a few minutes away. Don't worry, you won't miss him. He's probably expecting you anyway. Deadpool replied. How do you figure that? Naruto asked curiously. The man shrugged and continued his strides. He seems to know a lot. I'd say it's a safe bet to say that Colossus told him though. He's one of the X-Men I was telling you about. Damn. Should have probably paid more attention to his ramblings. Sorry, but who's Colossus? He asked. Deadpool waved a hand in a dismissive manner at the question. He's a member of the X-Men, the group that Charles Xavier created. You'll meet him soon. Fortunately, at least for Hela, the rest of the trip to their destination was quiet for the most part. The man had finally ceased his random stories and was finally being useful. After a few more minutes of silence, they finally stepped foot onto a large property. They walked down a large driveway that led to a beautiful fountain directly in front of the doors to the entrance. We're here. Talk about over the top, right? Deadpool said, looking at the large home that doubled as a school. Naruto and Hela weren't as impressed. Compared to Asgard, where things were literally lined in gold, this was actually underwhelming. Their own home that they'd been gifted by Odin after their marriage was almost like a palace. Golden fountains, precious metals lining the walls and floor, and more space than they'd ever occupy. Still, for a human home it wasn't too bad, they supposed. Just a heads up, I won't be joining you from here. I have a couple things I need to take care of. Deadpool informed them. No matter. Hela responded quickly. Naruto gave her a brief look that she knew to mean behave. The woman rolled her eyes but complied and didn't say anything after that. Take care of your business. Thank you for bringing us here. Naruto thanked the man. Deadpool gave a salute and quickly turned around, preparing to leave. I'm sure I'll be seeing you guys again real soon, you wouldn't be here otherwise. Naruto nodded once again and watched the man depart. Looking over to his wife, he motioned her to follow him and walked up to the door. Knocking twice, the two didn't have to wait long before the sound of steps could be heard getting closer and closer. When the door opened, they were greeted by the woman Tony Stark had informed him was Aurora Monroe. Hello, is there something you need? She asked politely. Though she tried to be discreet, neither Naruto or Hela missed the way her eyes gave them a once-over, almost as if discerning whether they were a threat or not. Hello, Ms. Monroe. Naruto greeted with a subtle nod of his head. My name is Naruto Uzumaki and this is Hela, Odin's daughter Uzumaki. We have some important news we'd like to discuss with Dr. Xavier. Is he around by chance? Naruto asked. Odin's daughter? As in the daughter of Norse god Odin? Ororo. Hela rolled her eyes. Yes. It's Uzumaki now, but I suppose you mortals can refer to me as Odin's daughter. Their conversation was interrupted by a third voice that came from behind the woman. Opening the door slightly wider so that the man could be seen, Naruto smiled, having found exactly who he was looking for. Good afternoon. The bald man on the wheelchair greeted them as he rolled up to the door. Dr. Charles Xavier, owner of this institution. To what do I owe the pleasure of having a Norse goddess and her husband visit? He asked. The man must have seen some things in his life if the presence of two gods didn't faze him. Aurora looked from the pair to Charles with a confused look on her face. Oh, I thought you were busy today. The bald man shook his head. No, I believe they are the ones Peter told me about earlier today. They were seen stepping out of a portal and later on with Mr. Wilson, partook in some interesting activities from what I've been told. People have claimed Jesus has returned. He said with a chuckle. Hela rolled her eyes and shook her head. She knew humoring that man would be a bad idea. Naruto meanwhile partook in the laughter. It's strange that a majority of the people seemingly know about super-powered individuals, but doing some very minor actions had them losing their minds. The bald man nodded in agreement and used his hands to change the direction he was facing. Why don't we speak in my office? It's more comfortable there. Aurora, would you like to join us? Having known the man as long as she did, knew he was asking her to be there. She nodded and tagged along quietly, listening intently as Charles and Naruto held conversation about the school and the interior design. As they made their way down the halls, they caught the attention of a group of students that happened to be walking in the opposite direction. There were 3 of them and they couldn't help but glance at the 2 newcomers. Students? Naruto asked. The wheelchair-bound man nodded. Correct. Seeing as we have their attention, I'll introduce them. The first was a man wearing all black with some red-tinted glasses. He was relatively tall but not very imposing. The next was a woman with brown and white hair. She was just a bit shorter than Hela but had a great figure. Her demeanor wasn't as confident as the man next to her and she seemed almost sad. Naruto noticed how she did her best to stay far enough away that her hand wouldn't even brush up against anyone's. Usually it happened by mistake, but for her to consciously be avoiding it, something wasn't right. Next to her was another woman, this one slightly taller than the last with red hair and an equally great figure. She stood tall and exuded confidence the way the man did. She was staring at the 2 of them with curiosity in her eyes but also a mix of suspicion. Scott, Anna, Jean. I'd like you to meet Mr. and Mrs. Uzumaki. Charles said. Naruto walked forward and took Scott's hand. The man shook his hand and looked him in the eyes and nodded. A pleasure, Scott said, to which he replied, likewise. Jean moved over and went next, something that again didn't go unnoticed by either of the 2. When they finally got to Anna, Naruto knew he was right on the money. She didn't extend her hand. You're afraid of physical contact, Naruto stated, shocking the others except Hela. If I had to take a guess, I'd say it has something to do with this mutant gene you were probably born with. You don't have to worry, I promise no matter what you do nothing will happen to me. He added. Charles Xavier thought back to what he'd been told by Colossus and wondered how it could be that he wasn't a mutant. Had the man been lied to? No, that wasn't like Peter. He said they appeared from a portal, meaning they must have some sort of power. Xavier wasn't the only one mentally trying to figure things out. Jean Grey was now staring at the blonde with suspicion clear on her face. The man didn't know what he was in for. He was promising that he'd be okay even though he didn't know the first thing about Rogue's powers. Without a second thought, she activated her own powers and attempted to read the man's mind. That was a mistake she'd soon regret. Her vision went black and she soon found herself in a completely different room. The young woman took in her surroundings trying to find out where she'd been teleported to. Was this the blonde man's doing? If so, how had he attacked before anyone realized it? To add to the danger she was feeling, her powers didn't seem to be working either. Just what the hell had he done? Now on high alert in case of an attack, she realized that she was actually in a flooded room of some sort. The water went up to her ankles and she mentally patted herself on the back for wearing boots today. Seeing that there was only one way to go and that there was a speck of light further ahead, she trekked forward. The sound of the water being displaced with each step only served to make her more uneasy. She was confident in her abilities, but here, wherever here was, they weren't working. When she finally made it to the end of the tunnel she was in, her eyes narrowed in suspicion at what she was seeing. There was no wall that indicated a dead end, instead it was nothing but black. The light seemingly being absorbed completely, not letting anything bounce back for her to see. Something's wrong, she thought to herself. She could feel her heart accelerating and her blood pumping faster. Her instincts were yelling, pleading with her to turn around and run, but she found herself unable to move. Sweat rolled down her temple and she felt like she'd pass out the moment two large animalistic arms emerged from the darkness. The arms were soon followed by the large face of a snarling fox. The fox's teeth alone were as large as she was and its red eyes were glowing, staring dangerously at her. Kurama. Finally awake, I see. The fox's attention was drawn behind her, and as much as she wanted to turn around, her body would not let her. Even though she was petrified at the moment, she was still able to discern that the voice belonged to the blonde whose mind she'd tried to read. Naruto. Who is this woman? Kurama asked, turning his attention back to Jean. The snarl was gone, not that it made it any better, and now it looked at her with a look she knew meant he wanted answers. This would be Jean Grey, Naruto said as he walked past her. Jean was further shocked when the blonde walked up the large fox, jumped, and hugged it at the snout. She wasn't sure if her mind was playing tricks on her, but she was sure she saw the fox's face soften up for a moment before getting serious again. Kurama exhaled strongly through his nose and used one hand to gently grab Naruto by his shirt and pry him off before placing him back on the ground. Is this woman a friend of yours? He asked. Not exactly. Just met her, but it seems she was curious enough about something that she decided to take a peek inside. Not the best idea. He told her almost as if he were scolding a child. Come to think of it, if she's here, then that means we're free, right? I just woke up from that forced slumber Odin put us through. He explained. Naruto smiled at his oldest friend and nodded. We are. He's dead. Where have you been? Naruto asked. You weren't here when I tried to check on you after we were sealed. Kurama placed its clawed hands in front of himself and laid down to be more comfortable before speaking. I've been here all along. When we were sealed there was some form of barrier between us. I could see you but couldn't hear you. You couldn't see or hear me. Shortly after that I was put to sleep. I only now regained enough power to wake up. Thanks in part to the woman here. Her invasion was the last little kick I needed. Naruto hummed to himself. It wasn't too surprising. Odin was powerful, so he must have had a way to even seal Kurama away. Well, it's good to have you back, Kurama. You have no idea the situation that we're in right now. Do tell, Kurama ordered with intrigue. I'll fill you in later. For now. Naruto trailed off, turning to the red-headed woman. Want to tell me what you're doing here? Though it sounded like a question, the woman knew it wasn't. Swallowing the lump she felt in her throat, Jean spoke. You claimed not to be a mutant and wanted to touch Anna. I had to make sure you weren't up to anything. Trying to protect one of your friends. I can respect that. Naruto complimented. You should be more careful about whose minds you invade though, you never know what they have in there. As you found out. He added, pointing towards the large fox. You don't need to worry though. Trust me when I say nothing will happen to me or her. Jean didn't get a chance to question him further as his hand placed itself on her head and pushed. Inhaling deeply, Jean found herself back in the mansion. Glancing around she noticed everyone was still in the same place they'd been when she'd left. It was almost as if no time had passed at all. I think you can take his word, Anna. Charles commented. The woman looked to the bald man and got a look of reassurance, then hesitantly placed her hand in his. She clenched her teeth, ready for the influx of information to rush her, only for none of that to happen. Their hands clasped and Naruto looked at the woman with a knowing smile. See? That wasn't so bad, was it? Naruto asked. The woman looked up at him with an amazed look and placed her other hand atop his. She slowly rubbed the back of his hand with hers, seemingly in a trance. Hela looked at their hands and back to the woman. Just as she took a step forward, the tension was cleared by Aurora, who coughed into her fist. "Well, now that introductions are over, we can continue, don't you agree, Charles?" she asked. Naruto removed his hand, only slightly uncomfortable by the caressing his hand had been given, and took a step back. "Of course. If you two would follow me." "Wait. Can we talk later?" the woman with the brown and white-colored hair asked loudly as they were walking away. Unfortunately for her, the blonde didn't get a chance to respond as his wife beat him to the punch. Hela looped her arm around his and gave her a cold stare. "We won't be here long." "You don't say something like that in front of his wife," they heard Scott say in a hushed tone. Hela huffed and pushed the thoughts of the woman from her mind. They had bigger matters to attend to. Reaching the office, the two were allowed in and told to sit across from the man. Aurora took her place next to the elder man and stood up straighter. "So tell me, what can I do for you?" he asked politely. The married couple glanced at each other, having a brief conversation with just a look. Hela crossed one leg over the other and rested her hand on a fist, content with letting Naruto do the talking. "Tell me, Mr. Xavier, have you ever heard of the Infinity Stones?" The next hour was spent with them being caught up to speed on the current happenings of the world. The Infinity Stones, Thanos' plan, and the destruction that would soon happen if he were to collect all 6. Charles and Aurora looked deeply worried by what they'd just heard. Aurora mostly thought about the students while Charles was more focused on the world repercussions it could have. "This is a dire situation. You said Thanos already possesses one of the stones?" the bald man asked. Naruto nodded. "So there are 5 left to be found. That gives us time to prepare. I have no doubt that despite our differences in views, even he would agree that this is worth uniting for." Aurora looked slightly shocked at his words. "You're planning to ask Eric for help?" she asked. "What if he goes looking for the stones himself? Won't do him much good. Without a suitable medium to channel the power through, they're useless. Also, there's only 2 stones we need to worry about at the moment," Naruto said as he stood up. Extending an arm, he revealed his staff, and the 2 X-Men's eyes were drawn to the glowing blue and red stones embedded near the top. "We already have the Space and Reality Stone. I know where the Mind Stone is, and Thanos has the Power Stone. All that's left unaccounted for is the Time Stone and the Soul Stone," Hela continued. "Thanos already sent minions to try to collect the Mind Stone and failed. Our guess is he's heading for the Soul Stone first before making a move again. Before I can get another stone, however, I'm going to need a new staff. This one is powerful, but it won't be able to withstand more than the 2 stones it has already. I'll need to deal with that first," Naruto finished. "I see," Charles muttered to himself. "I will see what I can do about gathering some powerful allies. I'll make a few calls tonight. If you would excuse me, you've given me a lot to think about." The 3 occupants in the room watched the man roll his way out of the room with a pensive look on his face. Naruto waited until the door was closed to speak up once more. "I think he took that rather well." Hela shook her head. "Possibly. Better than I thought he would. Now that our work here is done, however, we should go." Naruto agreed and tapped the staff on the ground, forcing the Space Stone to generate a blue and black portal just behind their chairs. "Do tell the young lady that we won't be able to talk today," Naruto said to Aurora before stepping in. Hela did no such thing and walked through without so much as a look back. Aurora let out a breath and sat down. How had today gone from team training problems to potential end-of-the-world problems? XXXXXXXXXX. Sanctum Sanctorum. "Is something the matter?" someone asked. "Yes. Odin's daughter and son-in-law are on Earth at the moment," another man said. "I know what you're thinking. Don't confront them just yet, let's see what's going on first. In the meantime, I have a few things to do." An orange circle appeared in thin air, showing snowy mountaintops, and the man stepped through. Once the portal closed, the remaining man let a small smile appear on his face. "All right, let's see what they're here for." Chapter 8. All I'm saying is that maybe they're not that bad, Peter reasoned. Over the past couple of minutes, Banner had watched as Tony and Peter bantered back and forth about their new allies. Tony wouldn't consider them real allies just yet, as in his opinion, anyone who would willingly work with Loki couldn't be that much better. Their eyes traveled across the room as a dark blue portal appeared and the 2 deities in question stepped out. The blonde's hand holding the staff extended and accidentally hit an expensive-looking decoration piece Tony had set on a small table. Everyone's eyes followed the piece as it fell off the table and shattered with ease. Whoops! Pieces slid on the floor in every direction and Tony turned to Peter, giving him a look. It was an accident, it could have happened to anyone. Peter defended, though he wished they hadn't done that, as he was trying to make a case for them. Ignoring the teenager for the time being, the man spoke. "Well? How'd it go?" Naruto smiled proudly and nodded. Everything went well. We told him what was going down and he seemed pretty concerned. As he should be. Banner commented. He's going to be making some calls, but it's safe to assume we got his support. He finished. So what do we do now? Banner asked. It's gonna take some time for Dr. Xavier to gather people and we still don't know what to do about the Mind Stone. We can't just rip it out of Vision, that's what keeps him alive. Tony nodded and rubbed his chin in thought. That's true. Speaking of time, that stone is out there somewhere too and we have no leads to follow. As far as I can remember, we haven't come across any threat that was using it. You don't think Thanos knows where it is, do you? Bruce asked in mild concern. The thought of the purple giant getting his hand on another stone filled him with dread. He'd already seen what the blonde could do with two, and even though he was on their side, it put him on edge. If Thanos got the rest, it would be catastrophic. Fortunately for him, his worries were put to rest by Naruto, who was shaking his head. Doubt it. He had the Power Stone when we fought. If he knew where the Time Stone was, I think he would have had it already. What about the other stone? You said there was also the Soul Stone, right? Peter asked. There's a chance he knows where that one is, or at least has an idea. Hela pitched in. He wouldn't have made the decision to retreat if he wasn't certain he could get more fire power. Naruto stared at the staff in his hand and felt the power flowing through it. All this talk of the stones had brought up a concern in his mind. Hela's weapons were powerful, she was the goddess of death after all, but even now he could tell the staff was barely able to use the might of two stones. Trying to add a third would certainly cause it to shatter. He would need to head to Nidavellir sometime soon to get a real staff constructed. A distant memory from the Fourth Great Ninja War made its way to his mind, specifically, one of their adversaries at the time. He nodded mentally, he knew just how the new staff would look. Noticing that everyone was looking at him, he nodded and hoped they had asked a yes or no question. If the rolling of her eyes was any indication, he would take a guess that it wasn't. They're wondering what you think about whether or not Thanos has more stones by now and if you can handle it. Chances are he'll at least have the Soul Stone the next time we meet. I'm certain that even with two stones I should be able to overpower him. I can feel my strength slowly returning to me, so the longer we can avoid the confrontation, the stronger I'll be. Anyway, he said, trying to get back to the other stone. The issue with Vision is simply taking the stone out. Using the Reality Stone I can create another source of power to keep him alive. It'll be up to you guys to equip him with it however. Naruto finished. Peter frowned in confusion and took a look around the room. Two of the smartest men in the world were right next to each other, but no one had suggested the obvious solution. Oh, excuse me. Everyone looked at the young man, who slightly shrunk under their gaze. Why not just give Vision a body? He said. The room went silent and those around began looking back at each other. What do you mean by that? Naruto asked. Well, the Reality Stone can literally warp reality, right? Naruto nodded. Then why don't you just reality warp Vision a new body? It should be easy enough for you, right? In theory that's all it should take. The blonde scratched the side of his head and thought about it. As of now all he'd been doing was using a little bit of energy to cause the stone to work. If anything it acted as an overpowered genjutsu, but if he actually forced more power? He tapped the staff on the ground, letting the stone glow a deep red. In his hand a small red can materialized, complete with liquid inside. The stone was still glowing, so the can was still with him. Imposing his will, he cut power to the stone and smiled widely at the sight of the can still in place. Hela raised an impressed eyebrow at the display and felt immense pride in her dearest. Part of her wondered if she would have the power to control a stone to that degree. Use one, of course, but more than one with that kind of control? That was iffy. She turned her attention to the young man who had made the suggestion and put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed lightly to show her approval of his idea. Her lips quivered upward in a mischievous smile at the feeling of him tensing upon contact. Please don't kill me, she heard him whisper repeatedly. Naruto tried not to show how amusing he found the boy and decided to save him from the position he found himself in. I hadn't thought of that actually. Next time I see him I can just change his body's composition to make it organic. And the stone? Tony asked. He was slightly concerned at the power the stones had, to be able to just turn something inorganic into a living being with a thought. It just wasn't natural. He eyed the blonde as well. He didn't know him, but Thor trusted him and he trusted Thor. Loki, not so much, but even if the god of mischief decided to go rogue, with the power at their disposal, handling him would be easier this time around. Thinking of the god reminded him of their last encounter and he grinned. The image of the Hulk grabbing the man by the leg and smashing him into the ground repeatedly always put him in a good mood. Even though they had seemingly solved one problem, Banner still had an apprehensive look on his face. A look which Tony recognized and asked what was wrong. Well, I still see one pretty big problem. Banner started. If his body is just changed to be organic, he would be a grown man but is really only 2 years old. Vision has no birth certificate or records of any kind. Not only that, but he's a machine, he won't be used to the bodily functions a human has, like needing to eat or breathe. All eyes turned back to Naruto. He glanced at everyone and shrugged. Yeah, that's going to be on him. All I can do is provide the means to keep him alive and then take care of the stone. We can deal with that after saving the world from destruction. Sound good? He asked rhetorically. Great. Now if we can. The Avenger cut his sentence off abruptly as the phone in his pocket began to ring out. Ha! That was fast. It's Dr. Xavier. 1 second. He said, raising a finger and putting the phone to his ear. Everyone perked up. It seemed the man had more pull than they believed if he was able to round everyone up that quickly. Tony nodded a few times, throwing in a few yes, sure, and aha, every now and then until he pulled the phone away from himself and tried handing it to the blonde. Naruto frowned. What? It's for you. A young lady named Anna Marie from the Xavier Institute wants to talk to you. Popular, weren't you? Tony asked with a smirk, seeing the goddess of death beginning to look upset. Only he would find it appropriate to make that comment knowing a man's wife was getting upset. Hela turned to Naruto and shot him a sharp look and placed a hand on her hip. She remembered perfectly who Anna Marie was and narrowed her eyes. The way the child caressed her husband's hand when they shook hands rubbed her the wrong way. She had been seconds away from removing her head cleanly off her shoulders. Naruto looked at the outstretched hand but made no moves to take the phone. Answer it. Hela ordered. I'm good actually. He told her, trying to decline. Unfortunately, his wife wasn't trying to hear that, and with a soft shove, she moved him closer to the phone. Answer the phone and see what the child wants. The blonde looked around the room hoping one of them would come to his aid, only to be disappointed. It seemed everyone had decided the ground or the walls were more interesting at the moment. I really don't think it's necessary. He tried one more time. We have things to take care of. Hela gave him one last look. A look that he hadn't seen since the early days in their relationship when she thought he had been flirting with some girl in their army. That had been a rough day, but once he proved it wasn't as she thought, she made it up to him in a very pleasant way later that night. He sighed and took the phone, placing it up to his ear. Hela was quick to place her head on the other side of the device in an attempt to listen in on the conversation. Hello? Hello. Anna replied in a nervous and unsure voice, I wanted to talk to you when you were here, but you were in a rush. I was wondering when you would be back. Naruto heard whispers in the background, probably the students that were there earlier. When you two would be back, she corrected. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Well, we were only there to discuss some important information with Dr. Xavier, so I'm not sure when or if we'll be back. If we do return, I'll be sure to let you know. He answered before handing back the phone to Tony. He wrapped his arm around his wife's waist. Her eyes were still narrowed, but now her arms were crossed. She's unable to touch anyone because of her powers. I'm sure she was just shocked to see that she could actually make contact with someone and got excited. He tried reasoning. He loved his wife, he really did, but he would be lying if he didn't think her jealousy went out of control sometimes. She would swear up and down that she wasn't a jealous woman, claiming that no other woman could compare to her in either beauty, power, or skill, both in and out of the bedroom. That all went out the window whenever someone decided to get bold and get too close to what she considered hers. You have nothing to worry about, all right? Hela rolled her eyes again but leaned her head into his shoulder. Perhaps she had let herself lose it for a moment. The blonde sighed in relief. Looking back at the Avengers, he was about to speak, but like Tony, he stopped himself before the first word could even make it out of his mouth. He quickly turned so that he was looking out the window into the distance. What's wrong? Peter asked, trying to see if anything would set his spider sense off. A stone is nearby. Naruto replied. It's staying in place, activating and deactivating. Whoever has it is either practicing with it, or they're trying to get attention. Tapping the staff on the ground, the dark blue and black portal opened behind him. I'll be back in a moment, if all goes well we'll have another stone. He said. Hela took his arm and followed him into the portal. Once closed, the remaining men glanced at each other. You don't think it's a trap, do you? Peter asked. Tony shook his head. Can't say for sure. If they know someone has 2 stones they wouldn't want to draw attention to themselves. We'll just have to let him handle it and hope for the best. XXXX. The married couple appeared a few miles out in the middle of the large city, ignoring the looks from the civilians going about their day. Naruto walked in the direction he felt the stone until suddenly, the feeling stopped. This is it. 177A, Bleecker Street. Naruto read. Walking up the steps, he raised a hand to knock on the door. The moment his knuckles made contact with the blue door, the environment changed. The street they were on had been changed into a dark room with multiple glass display cases and a large circular symbol on the side of the building. A bit of light shone through the slightly tinted glass. "Well, this is new," Hela commented, not at all impressed by the display. Her finger ran across one of the display cases and she wrinkled her nose at the dust that had stuck itself to her. "This place is filthy. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's a dirty home." "That sounds like something an upset mother would say." Naruto snorted. "Really?" she asked in a sardonic tone. "Perhaps after all this is over you can make good on that promise you made to me before we were sealed away. We can see if I really do say that." Naruto and Hela. They heard from above them. Neither bothered to get into any sort of fighting positions even as the singular man floated down until he was standing right in front of them. Odin's two most valuable. They stared at the man before them, each taking in his features and measuring him up. The man seemed to be somewhere in his 30s with a small goatee and wore a blue outfit that seemed almost black in this lighting, along with the red cape, and finally a gold necklace around his neck. Naruto also took note of the cape the man wore and how it seemed to flow even though there's no wind blowing at the moment. "Maybe I should get one of those," he whispered to his wife. "You will not." Their eyes moved to the necklace and Naruto instantly knew that's where the stone was being kept. "You can put the staff down if you like," the man said, motioning to the small holder that had suddenly appeared next to him. The blonde shook his head. He'd made sure to grip the staff at the part where the infinity stones were being kept and since he wasn't on guard yet, Naruto knew the man couldn't sense them like he could. "I'll pass. You have us at a disadvantage, mister." Naruto trailed off. "My name is Dr. Stephen Strange, Sorcerer Supreme." He introduced himself. Naruto nodded politely, his head turning slowly as Strange walked by them to lean against one of the walls. "A pleasure. Can I presume you called us here on purpose?" Naruto asked. Dr. Strange confirmed his suspicion with a slight incline of his head. "That's correct." Suddenly, the room changed once more and they were now seated on some admittedly comfortable love seats. Naruto and Hela sat next to each other while the sorcerer sat across from them with a pensive look on his face. "As comfortable as we are," Naruto began. "Would you like to enlighten us as to why we're here?" Dr. Strange leaned forward in his seat. "One of my responsibilities as Sorcerer Supreme is to keep track of beings that could potentially be a threat to the Earth." His eyes slowly drifted to the soul woman in the room. "I had this same conversation with your brother Thor not too long ago, although in his case it was for bringing Loki." Hela laughed. "I can see why you would want to keep track of him. The reason you two are here is because like Loki, you're some of those beings," he revealed. Naruto raised an eyebrow. He hadn't seen that coming. "So you want to know why we're here?" "To my knowledge the two of you were a well-guarded Asgardian secret, sealed away for whatever reason Odin saw fit," he concluded. "So why are you on Earth?" Hela smirked. "Well, it didn't work out for the old man, did it? A pity he was dead by the time we returned." Naruto ignored his wife for the moment and leaned back. "I'm glad you asked. Tell me, on that list of yours, is there a person named Thanos?" "The name isn't familiar to me." The man responded evenly. Figures, he thought. Naruto was glad the man allowed him to speak without interrupting as he gave him the same information he gave Xavier. The man listened to every word and looked more serious the longer the blonde spoke. It was clear to see that Thanos was the true threat to the world at the moment. "So he plans to wipe half of the universe," Dr. Strange said with a tone of disbelief. He'd heard some things in his time but this was a whole new level of crazy. "That's right. So we're going to put a stop to it. To do that," Naruto pointed the end of the staff at the man's necklace. "We need the stone you're wearing around your neck." Strange smiled but it held no warmth. "I'm afraid that won't be happening. If Thanos really is coming, the stone will need to be protected and I can't just hand it over to an Asgardian I've never met." For the first time since arriving, Naruto moved his hand lower on the staff to show the two stones glowing brightly. "Well, I'm not really Asgardian for one. Second, as you can see, I already have two of the stones in my possession. The Avengers are already working with us as is Charles Xavier. So again, I'll ask politely. Please hand over the stone." His voice, while still calm, held some force behind it. A yellow portal passed through the room and like before, they were in a completely new area. "Here again?" Hela asked, seeing the large green field they now stood in. "This is where Odin died. If you want the stone you're going to have to take it by force. I'm not handing it over." Naruto sighed, he really hoped the man could have just listened to him talk and see things his way like when he was younger. Times really had changed. Looking over at his wife, he spoke the same words she told him when they'd been recently freed. "Don't interfere." Doctor Strange began to float in the air, and golden rings spinning clockwise began to appear along his sleeves. Doing as she was told, Hela created plenty of space between herself and the two men. Strange was high above them looking down with the most utter seriousness on his face. On the other hand, Naruto looked as calm as could be, not at all worried about the man he was facing. Golden spectral whips formed in the sorcerer's hands and swiftly made their way towards the blonde in zigzag patterns. As they approached, Naruto whistled as he was able to feel how much energy was coursing through them. Tilting his head to the right, the first whip passed by him harmlessly while the second one was aimed at his chest. Using the staff, he easily deflected the trajectory of the attack, allowing it to crash into the ground. Glancing up once again, he frowned at the lack of an opponent and began surveying the area. He couldn't have just disappeared. A gold eyebrow was raised at the sight of the sky beginning to break apart in the shape of triangles. Light bounced off of them as if it were glass. "That's new," he commented. The large sheet of glass began to descend on him, but he made no effort to move, though he was prepared to use one of the stones if necessary. The glass passed over him harmlessly, but suddenly, he found himself upside down, falling towards the sky. "We're in the mirror dimension now," he heard from all around him. "Here, I'm in control." Naruto finally found Doctor Strange. He was hovering in front of him, moving his hands in an intricate way with his magic. Magical circles began to appear all around him, each with illegible text scribed on them. The blonde's eyes widened when each portal created 10 of those whips and latched onto him, slowly applying more and more pressure onto him. Doctor Strange watched as the whips quickly enveloped every inch of him until a golden mummy-like object flowed in the sky. The man frowned. At the simplicity of the battle, something wasn't right. His assumption was correct. When the whips began covering his face, Strange never noticed the smirk that had donned the blonde's face. "I'm getting claustrophobic just thinking about being caught in that," Strange heard from beside him. Turning slowly, the man came face to face with the same blonde who should have been up above getting squeezed until he was out cold. "What?" Making a single hand sign, the Naruto trapped inside the makeshift cocoon exploded. The staff was then pointed at the man, who was quick to conjure a large circular shield in front of him to protect him from the red blast that was aimed at him. It was a relatively low-level blast, meant only to test the defensive capabilities of his magic. Strange has good reflexes. He blocked the attack when I was only a foot away and was already conjuring up another attack with his free hand. Naruto thought, mildly impressed. He was no Sasuke in terms of speed, but still rather impressive. The world shifted once more, and again, the blonde allowed himself to fall, if only to see what the sorcerer would do next. He was definitely interested in this magic he wielded, and wanted to see much more. Giant spectral arms appeared out of thin air, all reaching for and trying to punch at the blonde. Unlike before, he didn't have a clone on standby to switch places with, so he would need to actively maneuver to avoid being grabbed. As long as we're in this dimension, Strange can do damn near anything he wants. "I'll need to get out before I can start fighting back," he thought. In the distance he could see the border of the mirror dimension slowly turning in place. Locking onto Strange, he disappeared and reappeared in front of the now shocked sorcerer. Another shield was conjured to stop the punch that had been sent his way. Naruto's fist collided with the barrier, created several cracks in it. He aimed the staff at the barrier and the reality stone began to glow brightly. "Sorcerer or not, you're still human. Once the shield breaks, you'll move aside," Naruto thought. The cracks became more profound until finally, as he predicted, the shield could bear no more. Millions of smaller cracks appeared on the shield until it finally burst under the immense pressure. As predicted, Strange moved his body aside to not get hit by the concentrated power of the stone. Naruto smiled. Everything went just as planned. The attack wasn't cancelled and it soon found the border of the dimension, easily destroying it in the process. The world was right side up once again. Doctor Strange was down on a knee, panting slightly, but righted himself a moment later. Naruto was impressed. Taking the full brunt of an infinity stone and managing to hold it back even for a split second was something to be praised, but it definitely took a lot out of the man. "That mirror dimension and the attack from the stone took a lot out of you," Naruto commented. "You sure you don't want to just reconsider?" The answer was Strange, getting himself into a fighting position once again. Sighing again, Naruto realized the only way he would listen would be if he had no choice. Just like Madara had only listened to Hashirama after he'd been screwed over by Zetsu and Kagaya, it seemed Doctor Strange would need to be out of commission. Bending his knees, he jumped high into the sky until he was a mere dot and then disappeared. Strange looked over at Hela, who was filing her nails. She felt his gaze and shrugged uncaringly. "Don't look at me. I'm not sure what he's doing either." The cloudy sky began to darken even though it was supposed to be light out. The clouds turned a deep dark gray and lightning flashed through the empty skies. Wind picked up rapidly and then a loud piercing roar echoed across the land. The clouds began to move into a swirl-like pattern, gaining speed as they did so. A single drop of rain fell, then another and another, until a light drizzle fell upon the battlefield. Strange kept his gaze up at the sky. He knew Naruto was up there somewhere. Another roar echoed, this one louder than before. The force of the roar was so great, the clouds cleared, revealing a large lightning dragon that was circling the skies. Strange didn't fear it. He'd seen worse with Dormammu, but he couldn't simply write it off either. The beast easily covered the battlefield and then some. His eye spotted Naruto, carelessly riding along the body of the dragon, staring right back at him. The dragon followed his line of sight until it too was staring at him and began to descend with its mouth wide open. Strange's hands moved rapidly, focusing on creating the strongest shield he could muster. His plan was derailed however, as the dragon exploded into a shower of miniature dragons, each coming down faster than he could react. A smaller shield enveloped him, managing to stop the lightning strikes that were hitting. With the disbursement of the dragon, Naruto could no longer be seen. The flashes of light didn't help much either. Using a simple spell to locate someone, he saw the blonde with his hands in his pockets, falling alongside one of the dragons. Naruto raised the staff high into the air and enacted the second part of the plan. The dragons and lightning were to keep him busy, to hide the main attack. A red veil flashed across the area and Strange felt his stomach drop and dread filled his body. Behind the blonde was a giant meteor, perhaps just a bit smaller than the moon, making its way towards them. He's going to kill everyone. Strange muttered, trying desperately to think of a spell that could stop this. No. Naruto spoke from beside him. Hela and I will easily survive and I'm sure the stone will too. I'll retrieve it afterwards. He said smoothly. Strange's shoulders dropped as the realization that death was imminent. Naruto looked at him, then Hela, and finally at the meteor. Just as it would have collided with the earth, it disappeared as if it were never present. What? Strange muttered. Naruto walked around him until he was kneeling in front of him and rested the staff against his shoulders. I didn't come here to kill you, Strange. I've never been one to kill people just because. I just needed you to see that fighting me would be pointless. If I really wanted the stone I could have had it within the second the fighting started. All this, to prove a point. Strange muttered in disbelief. Naruto laughed. Yup. So, care to hand the time stone over? Strange stared at him and crossed his arms in a strange way in front of his chest. The golden amulet hanging from his neck shifted until the green light from the time stone made itself seen. The Sorcerer Supreme sat down with his legs crossed and brought his hands up. What is he doing? Hela asked, now standing beside him. Strange was floating a few feet off the ground, his body moving in erratic patterns with blurs coming off of him every so often. I'm not sure. The man stayed in that position for 5 minutes until he fell down, taking deep breaths with wide eyes. You all right? Naruto asked. Strange coughed but nodded nonetheless. What was that? I was looking into the future. Seeing how safe the stone would be with me and my people. And? Hela asked, curious about this ability to see into the future. Thanos takes it from me every time if I keep it. He replied grimly. I have to know, what do you plan to do with the stones? Keep them out of Thanos' hands. He plans to erase half of every living thing in the universe. I plan to help those struggling. I'll make sure there's just enough so people everywhere have access to what's necessary for life. Evolution of their species will be up to them after that. You can think of me as something of an overseer. Dr. Strange stared at the blonde in front of him and grabbed the amulet. Pulling it off of his neck, he begrudgingly handed it over. Naruto took it from the man, and put it around his neck. Grabbing the amulet itself, he forced it to activate and smiled when the mechanism opened. He wouldn't take it out just yet, he still needed the new staff. Standing up, he nodded to his wife. We got what we needed, now we just need vision and we'll have 4. Turning to Strange, he continued. There's no doubt Thanos will be here soon. You know what's coming, if you want to help, gather everyone you can and prepare for an invasion soon. Despite having lost, Strange nodded. He was mature enough to realize this was bigger than himself and the stone now. While he may not like having to hand over the time stone, he would cooperate for the cause. Let's go. The married couple stepped through the portal and disappeared from the area, leaving Dr. Strange to mull over the events of the day and those to come. XXXX. The 3 Avengers turned to see the portal opening once more and wondered how things had gone. It hadn't been too long since they left and they could use some good news. Everyone noticed the new addition to Naruto's outfit in the form of the amulet around his neck. It went well then? Peter asked. Naruto nodded. The time stone is ours and we have the help of the Sorcerer Supreme. Great. So what now? Bruce asked. The blonde shrugged. We wait until we can talk to Vision. Not sure how long that'll take, but I think we should call it a day. Naruto said, looking out to the darkening skies. Is there somewhere on Asgard for us to rest? Surtur caused a lot of damage. Hela was going to tell him that he was the one that used their buildings as nails but decided against it. I'm sure there is. The two disappeared without another word, leaving the Avengers to their own devices. See. I told you they weren't that bad. Peter said in a proud tone. Asgard. The Queen is back. Hela announced cheerfully upon seeing her siblings. Thor rolled his eyes and Loki sighed. I can see that. What's that? Thor asked, pointing to the amulet. Naruto let it glow momentarily. This is the time stone. Naruto informed them. We're up to 3 now. Excellent. Now there are a few things we need to discuss. Thor began only to be cut off by Hela's raised hand. Whatever it is, it can wait until tomorrow. Naruto and I will be heading to our quarters to rest. She informed them. Both men made a face at her comment, causing her to roll her eyes again. Grow up, I didn't mean, never mind. Come now, Naruto. Naruto tapped both men on the shoulders and followed his wife as she led them away. As they walked, Hela stopped to think about what her brothers had thought. They'd done it once, but they were in a rush to get things done. Now they had a bit more time on their hands. Glancing over her shoulder, she grinned, seeing her husband's eyes on her rear. On second thought, maybe rest can wait until later. Hela spoke in a suggestive tone. The blonde matched her grin, realizing what she was getting at. He was never one to turn down such an invitation. I actually have an idea, he said, taking her hand and activating the reality stone. Just like when they acquired it, the two found themselves in the same place he'd taken them to. Hand in hand, they walked down the straight path towards the largest building. What are we doing back at your home? Hela asked. Now that she had a bit more time, she took in her surroundings to try to really take in where her beloved grew up. It seemed like a rather poor village compared to the gold-lined Asgard, but there was something homey about it. I want to fulfill a dream I had when I was younger, he replied cryptically. Hela raised an eyebrow. Didn't you become the leader of this place? Wasn't that your dream? He nodded. Yeah, that was the main dream. This one was more of a checklist-type dream. The woman didn't understand what was going on. She thought she had made her intentions to make love clear, but he'd brought her here instead? Maybe she should have been more direct, she thought. They made their way up the large stair set, completely invisible to the people walking by. She supposed with the power of the reality stone it wouldn't be hard to do. Naruto opened the door to the office and stepped inside with a nostalgic look on his face. I never thought I would be back here. Anyway, he said. Hela didn't get a chance to ask what. He grabbed her by the waist and with little effort placed her atop the desk right in front of the Hokage chair. It finally dawned on the woman what they were doing here. You brought me here, to have sex in your old office? She asked. Naruto nodded. One of my private dreams was to bring my wife here and have sex with her after achieving my goal. Unfortunately, I didn't get that chance then, but I do now. Hela laughed. Well then, you have your wife here. What will you do now? Calling upon the power of the reality stone once more, the two were left as naked as the day they were born. His eyes were drawn to her bare breasts, and despite having seen them for centuries, they still excited him like the first time. She had told him once that if her breasts really excited him that much, then he must have been an infant, to which he responded by saying she could call him an infant. His wife pulled him into her arms and brought her lips up to his, slowly letting their lips smack together. They'd been apart for so long that the simple feeling of desire she felt coming from her husband sent a chill down her spine. Likewise, Naruto loved the feeling of the goddess's soft lips on his. The subtle taste she left drove him crazy. The intensity of their kiss reminded him of their wedding night. He had gotten no sleep. Their lips separated momentarily to catch their breaths, but the small pecks continued. Letting his hands dip down to the small of her back, he pulled her closer so that she was just barely sitting on the edge of the table. He was able to see her rose beginning to drip and knew she wouldn't be wanting any foreplay. He was okay with that. He wanted her as much as she wanted him. They could have all the foreplay they wanted in the future. Rubbing 2 fingers along her slit, he looked her in the eyes and smirked at the lustful look she was sending him. Her hands were gripping his shoulders and he felt her nails begin to dig into him, a warning that she was getting frustrated. Chuckling to himself, he used her nectar as lube for the moment and with practiced ease pushed himself into his wife. If there was something he was thankful for about being sealed, it was for this moment right here. Hela was tighter now than she was on their wedding night. Her womanhood began to stretch to accommodate him, causing the woman to moan softly into his ear. Pulling slightly out of her, he enjoyed the wet sound that was created by the action and pushed back in with force. Hela's long legs quickly wrapped around his waist, preventing him from pulling out as much as he'd like. Long strokes were replaced with short but powerful ones. Her nails moved from his shoulders to his back and the raking motion she made caused him to wince slightly, but he didn't slow down. Hela's legs began to tighten up around his body at the same time, the telltale sign that her orgasm was approaching. They had only been doing it for about half an hour, but with how long it had been, it was to be expected. The grip he felt on his tool was almost painful, but he was committed to making sure she saw stars. He laid the woman back and had her grip the sides of the desk, so that he could continue with a bit more leverage. The fire within her burned hotter with every stroke, and never being one to hide her pleasure, Hela moaned loudly at the feeling of her orgasm finally hitting. Her body convulsed, but once again, Naruto didn't cease. Keeping the same pace, he reached down and pinched her clit to add to her sensation. The pleasure continued to build up within her. Her hands, which had been gripping the sides of the table, clenched with enough force to destroy the wood. Her cum drenched the area where she laid, much to Naruto's pleasure. Finally slowing down, he leaned forward to kiss the woman again and was glad when she reciprocated his action. "You might want to take a deep breath," he warned. Hela looked at him with a half-out-of-it look and wondered what he was talking about. Gripping her by the waist, his intensity sped up, every thrust from then on went deeper than she could remember. Hela could feel a dull soreness in between her legs, and as a warrior who would need to battle in the not-so-distant future, that could potentially slow her down. As a woman and wife, however, she wanted nothing more than for her husband to continue what he was doing and make her feel like this forever. Like the goddess she was, Hela endured the pleasurable pounding for another hour, experiencing 3 more mind-blowing orgasms. The throbbing she felt from her husband's cock inside of her warned her that he was on the verge as well. Wanting to make sure he was as satisfied as she was, Hela sat up and hugged him warmly while he did his thing. Whispering a mix of loving and dirty words in his ear still got him going like it used to, and finally, he let himself go. If anyone from the old days of Asgard were to see her now, they wouldn't be able to comprehend the kind of face she was making. Naruto's love filled her well, and the feeling of rope after rope of his cum was the last thing she needed to trigger another orgasm. Naruto's arms moved to her back and gently laid her down so that she could enjoy the feeling as much as possible. Looking down at their connected bodies, the gold glint of the amulet around his neck caught his attention. Looking at it and then his wife, a smile not seen since his prankster days as a child crept up on his face. Extending his hand, green runes like the ones Dr. Strange used appeared across the length of his arms. "What are you doing, darling?" Hela asked, slightly out of breath. Naruto didn't answer. His hand came down, rubbing just above her womanhood, and turned to the left. A green glow surrounded Hela, and soon her back arched again as her orgasm was rewinded and let to play again. She was already satisfied, but he would make sure she couldn't think straight. She had gotten him out of his prison, and for that, she deserved to feel something no other woman would ever get to experience. A small green rune appeared on her stomach and automatically rewinded time around her after she came, letting her experience it again and again. "Naruto, I'm fuck," she cried in pleasure. "This is..." The feeling of her clamping up on him over and over again was indescribable, but he was sure it was nothing compared to what she was experiencing. Smiling at his actions, he looked up and noticed the portraits of the previous Hokage staring back at him. It was a little off-putting. "You're either really proud of me, Dad, or you're turning in your grave for what I've just done," Naruto thought with amusement. Eventually, he cut power to the stone and let Hela rest. Sweat covered both of them, but she looked worse for wear. The mascara on her face ran down her face and her hair clung to her wet skin. The shaking of her body was much more pronounced, but the smile on her face remained. That was... She couldn't finish her sentence. "I know," Naruto teased. He picked her up in a bridal carry and adjusted his head so that she could wrap her arms around him. Her hold was tight, and he had a feeling she wouldn't be letting go of him tonight. Using the reality stone, he took them back where they originally were, and then the space stone to teleport them to their chambers. As he was placing her on their luxurious-looking bed, a chuckle from her caught his attention. "What is it?" he asked curiously. "I know this isn't what my father imagined you would be using the most powerful objects in the universe for when he told you." Naruto smiled. That was true, but then again, he didn't imagine Odin would seal them up either. In his mind he couldn't complain even if he were still alive. The man sealed them away, so he used the stones to turn his daughter into a quivering mess. That wasn't bad if you asked him. "Let's just get some rest, dear," Naruto whispered to her, planting a kiss on her forehead. "It might be one of the last peaceful sleep we get until after everything is over." Hela nodded and turned around to hold him before letting sleep claim her. Following suit, Naruto threw their blankets over them and joined her. XXXX. "Well, what did they say?" Thor asked impatiently. Loki shook his head. "I told you we should have waited before trying to talk to them," he said bitterly. "Why? Was Hela in a bad mood?" "I wish," he replied dryly. It seems our dear sister and brother-in-law decided to have a little fun in the hall. Now I have the image of his backside and our sister's dopey look burned into my mind. He replied with disgust as he made his way out of the large room. Thor grimaced. Well, better him than me I suppose. We can always use the time stone tomorrow. Chapter 9. Naruto was the first to wake up from their nap. He ran a hand over the sheets that covered him and his wife's bodies and let out a content sigh. Even though the universe was in danger, he took a moment to revel in the feeling of once again waking up in bed with seemingly no worries. He looked over and saw Hela still blissfully asleep. He wondered what the people would think if they saw their new queen with her frazzled hair, messed up makeup, and a tiny bit of drool dripping out of the corner of her mouth. The thought was funny enough to almost bring a chuckle out of the blonde. He was sure she wouldn't find it as funny as he did. Turning away from his wife, he extended a hand and quickly closed it when the staff containing 2 stones landed in his palm. Raising the staff up toward the light, he admired the soft glow the stones emitted. It was difficult to believe that these tiny objects held so much power and propelled him to a new level. I wonder how these could have changed the way things went back home. He thought to himself. It wasn't often that he would reminisce about his past life, but every so often he couldn't help but think back. With the Infinity Stones a lot of events could have been avoided. Hell, even with just one his fate could have been altered. The chance of growing up with an actual family was one of many that could have potentially come to pass. As good as it sounded though, he knew not everything was as good as it seemed in his head. For all he knew his life could have ended up worse somehow. He remembered a time back when he was still part of Oren's main forces. Soldiers would always talk about what they would do when the fighting was done and how much better their lives would be after. For some that was true, for some it wasn't. All that showed Naruto was that the grass wasn't always greener on the other side. All things considered, his grass was pretty green. Once you were able to look past Odin's betrayal, his lonely upbringing, and his wife's occasional overreaction to other women talking to him, his life had turned out pretty sweet. He blinked rapidly and focused once more on the stones, or rather the area on the staff where the stones were embedded. The special material Hela could create was strong, very much so. However, the metal wasn't designed to contain power on this scale. His hand reached up to the medallion hanging around his neck and brought it up to eye level. The intricate pattern that protected the time stone quickly unraveled, revealing the dark green gem. He knew if he tried to integrate the stone into the staff, it would surely destroy it. It was doubtful that Thanos would show up now, but if he did there would be no medium to channel the power from, which would essentially mean he would fight a single or double stone titan without any of the stones he had. I need a new staff. Soon. He muttered. One specially designed to withhold the power of the stones. He already had the design in mind. He would just need to have it be made. Fortunately, he knew exactly who would be able to have it done. His eyes glanced up at the C shape at the top of his current staff and shook his head. As much as he liked the simplicity, it would need to be replaced. Naruto would be the first to admit the change in design wasn't for practical reasons. Thanos had a golden gauntlet, Adam Warlock had his belt, Thor with his hammer, Loki with his headpiece, Hela with the antlers, and so on. He was the only one who was missing a signature of sorts. Something that would forever be synonymous with him. His wife would likely argue that the stones themselves would be his symbol. Anyone that knew of the Infinity Stones would immediately think of him since he would be their current wielder, but it wasn't the same. Is there a reason why you're staring at the stones so intensely, darling? He heard Hela ask. You have to channel energy through the staff to make them function. He stared at her with a blank face. Even though her hair and the blanket obscured most of her face, he was still able to make out the pleased smile on her face. One would think that as her husband he would be safe from her ridicule, but it seemed he was mistaken. I'm fully aware of how they work. He replied flatly. I was just lost in thought for a moment. What troubles you? She asked as she pulled the cover up to cover her body. Nothing troubles me. Just thinking of replacing this. I need the time stone integrated instead of just hanging around my neck. It'll be safer that way. He explained. Hela hummed to herself briefly. You'll need to go to Nidavellir soon then. You can have the staff made of you and not worry about overloading it. Naruto nodded. That's exactly where he'd planned on going. They had created Hela's, now Thor's hammer, after all. That's what I was thinking. I'll probably go later today. I still need to talk to Thor about his allies and what they plan to do about vision. He'll be expected to do things humans do naturally in order to survive when he's been a machine his whole life. That won't be an easy change to adapt to. And you wouldn't be willing to take the stone and deal with the problem later. Hela pointed out. He shook his head. Not unless the need to do so outweighs taking consideration of his life. As long as he's by us, the stone is with us. That's good enough for now. Hela sighed. As much as her darling had changed over the years they'd been together, he still did hold on to some of his old beliefs. The would-be execution was only allowed to go on because they'd been wronged, but Vision was a different case entirely. "So have you thought of what we'll do once the purple eyesore has been dealt with?" Hela asked after a moment of silence. Naruto leaned against the golden headrest of their bed and looked up to the ceiling. "Not really. You know me. I've never been a guy with a plan, I just do things." Hela snorted in amusement. She knew that very well. She had since lost track of how many detours they'd been on both during official jobs and when they were spending alone time during their courting process. It would be a lie to say it wasn't fun though, but she wouldn't tell him that. It would only encourage him. "I'm aware. I have 2 ideas." She began. Naruto nodded and gazed intensely at her. "The first is simple. I've taken my rightful place on the throne and as such, we must make sure there is an heir. You could have just said you wanted a baby." Naruto deadpanned. "Number 2. Hela continued, ignoring his teasing remark. "I believe once Asgard has been returned to its former glory, I believe we could reclaim the territories that once belonged to Asgard." She said only to pause when Naruto shook his head. "Whatever realms are free will remain so. I'm not using the stones to conquer places that manage to gain independence unless need be," he said, shutting her idea down. Hela frowned. Didn't he see the need to reclaim Asgard's territories? "With the stones we can." She felt her ire rise when he once again cut her off with a resounding no, which quickly shit that part of the conversation down. Hela raised an eyebrow in disbelief. He usually went along with all her plans, that's how things had gone for years. Now he told her no? She opened her mouth to retort but stopped herself as she saw him giving her a knowing look. If she tried to press the issue, she would look like a spoiled child whining because she couldn't get her way. "Get dressed. We have things to do," Naruto ordered as he got up off the bed. With a tap of his staff, he was once again dressed. Hela followed suit but kept her idea in the back of her mind. Perhaps he just needed time to come around. She could always try again in the future. "What's first on the agenda?" she asked as she stood up, feeling slightly envious that he could completely bypass the need to physically dress himself. Naruto turned around and glanced at her before going silent. Hela looked around the room, wondering what had caused the man to clam up until the answer hit her. She glanced down at her nude form and found that Naruto's blue eyes were still glued to her chest. Rolling her eyes, she picked up her clothing and made a point of covering up while keeping her eyes glued on his. "If seeing me naked still gets you so excited you can't speak, then you're a child," she commented. Naruto shrugged. "Doesn't matter if it's the first or the millionth time. It's always gonna have the same effect." Once she was dressed, Hela walked alongside him as they made their way down the lavish halls toward the throne room. As they walked, the goddess of death mentally catalogued everything that lined the walls, deciding what would stay and what would be replaced. One was a large mural of Odin sitting on the throne. Even as a painting, it still managed to radiate a certain poise that only a seasoned leader could give off. Extending her hand toward it, Hela released a small burst of power until nothing remained of the image. He might be gone, but her feelings about him were still very much fresh. "Really?" Naruto asked, giving her a flat look. "The old man is dead and you're still destroying things that have his image? What of it?" Naruto sighed but remained quiet. The man was already dead. What good was it to be mad at someone who wasn't even here anymore? When they entered the throne room, the pair saw Thor, who perked up as they came into view. Loki, much to their confusion, frowned as if disgusted, and looked away while muttering something to himself. Naruto glanced at Thor to see if he had any idea what that was about, but the man shrugged lazily. "Perhaps he's just having a bad day," Thor replied smoothly, not wanting to tell the two what his brother had seen. "Anyway, I'm glad you're here." "Are you?" Hela asked, crossing her arms and letting a smirk cross her face. "I'm glad you're here," he repeated, this time making sure to look at the blonde. Naruto held back a laugh at the frown that crossed his wife's face. "What can I do for you?" "We were hoping you would allow us to use the time stone," he began. "When Surtur was released, it caused a lot of damage. Many people's homes were destroyed. And those that were spared by Surtur were then used by you as nails to keep him in place," he accused. The blonde felt the slightest bit of heat make its way to his cheeks. Maybe he'd done a little too much. "Well, I was actually planning on dealing with that before taking care of other business," Naruto said as he walked past the god of thunder. "You were?" Thor asked. "I thought you didn't care about Asgard anymore." Naruto opened a door that led out to a balcony that overlooked the ruined city and sighed. "To a degree I still don't. But we have bigger issues. With Thanos on the loose, we'll need everyone in top shape. Hela draws her power from Asgard, and if it's in ruin..." He trailed off. Thor made a quiet sound of understanding and glanced at the woman who had walked behind them. That was the reason they'd sought to unleash Surtur in the first place, to bring her down to a level where she would be manageable. I see. Well then, I think the best thing to do would be to start with the residential districts. Get the people back in their homes and then we can move to other places. Thor proposed. Districts? Naruto asked curiously. What was Thor going on about? Tapping into his six paths power, he crouched down and then leaped high into the air. His form quickly passed the highest point of the golden structure that he and Hela now occupied and continued his ascent at a rapid pace. Odin's children down below looked up with frowns on their faces as they wondered what exactly he planned on doing. Soon, Naruto was no more than a black dot in the sky. What's he doing? Loki asked Hela. If there was one thing he knew about their new brother-in-law, it was that he was insane. He had to be. The man had married their sister and found great pleasure in upsetting one of the greatest forces in the universe. I'm not too sure. The woman replied. The trio soon received their answer in the form of a dark green light appearing on the streets below. Intricate lines connecting and interesting at different points lit the streets and soon, the patterns began to move at an almost hypnotically slow rate. Before any of them could speak, the ground rumbled. Bits of debris began floating, some high some low, until they collided with one another to form a larger piece. The process repeated itself continuously until full buildings were constructed and placed back where they had originally been. In less than 3 minutes, Asgard once again stood tall. Hela took a deep breath and extended her arms out as she relished in the feeling of energy returning to her. She could feel her power slowly progressing back to its natural state and she couldn't fight off the pleased grin that split her face. Thor and Loki glanced at each other, both glad that their previous issues had been dealt with. As much as they hated to admit their own powerlessness, they knew even together they wouldn't win against the pair. How's that? Naruto asked, suddenly landing in front of them. There were traces of sweat along his brow and his forehead, but other than that the man didn't look as fatigued as one would expect. Pretty good, I suppose. Thor replied, feeling the slightest bit of envy. So what's the plan now? We have plenty of time before any of the real fighting starts, so for now do as you please. It's probably a good idea to figure out what changes will be made to Asgard, how to implement them, and all that other stuff. He replied. I suppose you'll be going for your staff? Hela asked from her seat on the throne. He nodded. It shouldn't take too long, hopefully. Tapping the staff on the ground, the dark blue portal manifested in front of him. Without hesitating, he stepped in and disappeared from Asgard once again. I honestly thought that would take longer. Thor commented. All that means is that you're free for the day. Come along, we must plan my official inauguration. Hela ordered. Both men sighed to themselves, suddenly wishing that they had followed the blonde. Stark was likely busy doing something and Cap was somewhere in Africa recruiting. No matter how many different plans Thor went through in his mind, he couldn't think of anything that would get him out of this. Nidavellir. When Naruto stepped out of the portal, the first thing he noticed was that the area was damn near in ruin. Most of the tools the dwarves used to create their weapons and materials were nothing more than scrap metal bunched together. The blonde scanned the area, taking note of anything that might give him a hint as to what had gone down. There was no smoke or debris in the air, making it clear that whatever happened had transpired long ago. Walking further into the absurdly large work area, he carefully stepped around a large mallet and continued on. The feeling around him was eerie, it almost felt as though he were being watched even though he knew no one was within 100 feet of him. After a few minutes of walking, a sound finally reached his ear. Rustling, as if someone were searching through rubble. Being careful not to make any noise, he tightened his grip on the staff and prepared himself. If Thanos was here, he would put him down swiftly. Coming up on where the noise was coming from, Naruto lowered the staff when he realized it was one of the blacksmiths. From what he could see from his position behind the man, he was in rough but manageable shape. Taking an extra step, he let his footsteps resonate through the almost silent environment. As expected, the man turned around in surprise at his sudden appearance and got into a defensive position. Naruto could see the man's eyes eyeing the staff as well as his posture looking for any holes in his defenses. Naruto was slightly impressed at the man's tenacity. He was definitely hungry, tired, and partially beaten but still ready to hold his ground. Raising his hands up in a peaceful manner, he paused his stride. Relax. I'm not here to cause you any harm. He said slowly. Who are you? The dwarf demanded. A friend. I was hoping you would be able to create a new staff for me, but it seems that's not possible at the moment. Naruto replied carefully. The dwarf scoffed but didn't drop his guard. It's impossible. Everything has been destroyed by the Mad Titan. The man said, his tone becoming somber at the thought of his fallen comrades. I thought if we did as he asked and built him the gauntlet he would leave us alone, but... Naruto's hand clenched at the thought. He could see clearly how that exchange must have gone down. With the gauntlet and an infinity stone, power no less, it would have been impossible to stop him. Thanos won't stop here. Naruto began. The Mad Titan is on a quest to gather the remaining stones. I'm sure you can imagine what will happen if he achieves this. The gauntlet you built, it's capable of withstanding all 6 stones, yes? It is. It was made from the finest metal in the universe. We have more, but without our power source, it's impossible to get the furnace going to melt it. Naruto glanced at the large furnace with a curious look on his face. Next to it were large silver bricks of what he knew to be the metal he needed for his staff. If I could get things working, could you make a staff for me? I'm going to use it to kill Thanos. He admitted casually. The dwarf looked up at the blonde with shock and disbelief written across his face. You don't understand. Thanos is a monster, he kills anything in his way with overwhelming force. And he's got an army, going against him is suicide. Naruto smiled at the declaration and shook his head. I think you'll find that it's suicide to try something against me at the moment. Slowly he allowed the 2 stones to be seen as well as forcing the medallion to open so that the dark green stone could shine brightly. The dwarf's eyes almost bugged out as he realized what was in front of him. Thanos had been unstoppable with a single stone, to see someone brandishing 3 was almost enough to send him into a panic. I need a new staff that can contain the stones at full power. It's safe to say I have 4 at the moment, but that also means Thanos will eventually come for me. If he gets them, it's over for everyone. So you want me to put my faith in you that you're different? How can I trust your word? The dwarf asked. You can't. But I can offer you a token of good faith. Naruto said as he slammed the base of his staff into the ground. A red veil glided across the area and within a matter of seconds, Nidavellir was back to its former glory. I can't bring back everyone, but I can at least give you this back. He said sincerely. The star that had served as the main force for their forge glowed brightly. Bursts of energy flew from its surface as the power the dying star contained continued to make itself known. The man walked up to his tools and gently took hold of them as if he couldn't believe everything had just been restored. If you can do this, why can't you create your own weapon? The reality stone should be able to make it happen. Naruto nodded. That was true. Because I'm not sure if it'll be powerful enough to contain the power of all 6 stones. I can make a staff with no problem, but making sure it can hold up is the issue. I'd rather be certain. I see, and you're certain you can kill Thanos? The man asked once more. Another nod was his answer. Then let us begin. He announced. Can you make the staff you want? If it's multiple pieces, I need them done individually to make the casts. Naruto easily made the main section of the staff along with the 6 smaller pieces that would decorate it. The dwarf carefully inspected the pieces while muttering to himself and making notes off to the side. The man hit a switch and the large rings that circled the star began to move until they all lined up. 3 separate holes aimed directly at the star. Naruto shielded his eyes from the light as a thick beam shot out from the star and traveled down the path created by the rings into a large pit that was settled underneath the furnace. 3 bricks of URU metal were prepared and soon, the furnace took on a bright orange shine. The silvery metal glowed in a way that Naruto couldn't help but admire. He'd never gotten a weapon forged for himself by Odin or the Asgardians. It was a pretty surreal experience. The process of melting the steel took no more than 5 minutes. Carefully, the blacksmith tilted the large pot of molten metal into the single cast block he'd created. Naruto ignored the pointed look he got from the dwarf as he all but leaned over his shoulder to watch the metal be poured. Do you mind, boy? The dwarf asked in an irritated fashion. Oh, sorry. He replied before stepping back. Muttering something to himself, the blacksmith began to break the cast until the silvery metal was exposed. Naruto smiled to himself as he saw the staff emerge. Unlike the one in his hand at the moment, this one wouldn't brandish the stones along the main body. Instead, the stones would be held safely along the small holds built into the 6 rings that were permanently attached to the top section of the staff. The blonde grabbed the handle of the new staff and inspected every inch of the metal weapon. It felt much more powerful than the one Hela had created. The C-shape pattern at the top was gone, replaced with a complete circle with 6 rings jiggling on it. Whereas the first staff had been modeled after Madara's when he became the vessel for the 10 tails, this one was modeled after Obito when he first became its vessel. The rings that adorned the top of his new Shikujo were modified to have a small section near the bottom meant to house the stones. Placing the staff down, he carefully pried the stones out of the staff before placing them into their new home. It seemed as though they were being pulled in of their own accord. Rather than slam them in, the stones flew into place with little effort. Removing the medallion around his neck, he destroyed the protective casing with little trouble and gazed at the new stone. Placing it down, his hand let go of the stone and he watched as it took its place in its casing. It is done. It should hold up just fine when you add the 3 remaining stones. The blacksmith said with an air of pride in his work. Naruto patted the man on the back and took hold of the new staff, though not before taking in a deep breath. He remembered what it was like after inserting the latest stones, and each time was more intense than the last. He had acclimated to the feeling by now, but that would surely change with this and the Mind Stone. Upon his hand making contact with the staff, the now familiar surge of power began flowing through his body. Like last time, the power coursing through him was visible in the form of bright lines flowing up his arms and his body. This time with the added green for the new stone he was incorporating. His muscles tensed and his jaw clenched as he felt the surge make its way up his neck. Ah! He groaned out in slight discomfort. The dwarf watched on in apprehension. Never before had he seen someone take the power of a stone, let alone 3 at once. Just as he was going to ask if he was all right, the colors faded and Naruto was left grinning to himself as if he hadn't done something most would think impossible. Wow! Naruto muttered to himself. That felt more intense than last time, but I'm already used to it. Glancing back at the dwarf, he spoke. Thank you. I can't bring your people back, but I can at least leave your home as it is now. Bringing them back wasn't an issue. He was sure that with the power of the stones resurrecting the dead would be a cakewalk. What kept him from doing so, however, was the consequence for interfering with Death's domain. Creating resources once for the universe wouldn't save them from death, it just equaled everything out. If he were to begin bringing the dead back to life, who knows what would happen? The image of a golden light materializing in front of him popped into his mind. He'd been given this chance because of an entity. What if he took it away? That couldn't be allowed to happen. Thank you. The dwarf replied gratefully. It would have been better to have my people back, but I know when something is out of reach. What will you do now? I'm going to check up on something, gather another stone and then deal with Thanos. Naruto replied in a much too casual manner. The dwarf stared at him. Make him suffer. Once upon a time he would have been against it. He would have simply settled for having a talk with the man until he saw the error of his ways. But years upon years of life here showed him not everyone could be reached with words. Thanos' beliefs were far too ingrained into his mind to be swayed. Now their 2 philosophies were at war with one another and death would decide which one was right. Your people won't have died for nothing. Naruto told him before creating another portal. Without so much as looking back, he stepped inside and disappeared. Rather than head back to Asgard, Naruto reappeared in the center of the Avengers HQ. Tony, Peter, and Bruce all quickly got on guard upon seeing him before relaxing their muscles. Come on in, the door is open. Stark quipped sarcastically. New staff? Peter asked, taking a closer look. Love the rings. Makes it stand out more. Naruto preened at the teen's words. The staff was doing its job already. Don't they? He agreed. Bruce got a closer look, but his eyes were more so focused on the metal. It reminded him of Thor's hammer, only this one didn't have the scuffs that came with battle. His eyes then moved to Naruto's hand, which gripped the staff near the top. He could easily see the new addition to the Blonde Stone collection. The Time Stone was held firmly in place in the center of its own ring. And the Time Stone. That's 3. When are you going to get the Mind Stone from Vision? The scientist asked. Once I hear back from Cap. Once we have the Mind Stone, we'll just wait for Thanos to come to us. He knows where we are, so it'll be a waiting game. Peter rubbed his chin worriedly. It's safe to assume he won't come by himself. He probably knows most of the stones are here, so he won't risk coming alone. Naruto nodded in agreement. He'll have an army with him, but so will we. Once he goes down and I take the stones, the battle ends. Tony poured himself a glass of scotch and took a small sip before placing the glass cup down on one of the counters. What if he's prepared? He doesn't strike me as the type to do something without thinking it through. Excellent question. I'll wing it. He answered simply, smiling at the bewildered looks he'd received. While they might think he was serious, the reality was that he also had a backup plan. His own power was returning to him at an incredible rate. He already felt stronger now than he did when he fought Thanos using his 6 paths powers with the Space Stone. Using the power of 4 stones combined with a higher output of his 6 paths abilities would put him on an entirely new level than before. He was never one to feel cocky, but at the moment he couldn't help but savor the feeling. You'll wing it? Stark asked slowly. I'm sorry, I must have misheard you. Nope. I'll wing it. I've made it this far. I'm pretty sure we'll be all right. Tony looked ready to retort but stopped when his phone began to ring. The man pulled it out of his pocket and Naruto noticed that it wasn't the same phone as last time. This one looked far less advanced and seemed to be folded in half. Tony sighed and took the call, placing the phone up to his ear. Cap. Naruto heard the man say. Aha. Right. No. Well, we have a universe-threatening madman on the loose, Thor's brother-in-law here with 3 stones, Oh, and he said he'll wing how he deals with Thanos. Is he always like this? Naruto asked Peter. Kinda. Yeah. The boy replied. Would it be possible to make some chocolate or something? I haven't eaten and my stomach is starting to make some pretty loud noises. He requested. Naruto shrugged and pointed the staff at one of Peter's hands. Out of thin air a 5-pound brick of chocolate materialized in the boy's palm. There you go. Thanks. Peter grumbled. What was he supposed to do with 5 pounds? How was he supposed to take a bite? The brick was bigger than his mouth could open and felt more solid than stone. It's for you. Tony interrupted, holding the phone toward Naruto. At least this time he wouldn't have to deal with a jealous Hela. Hey Cap. Naruto answered happily. Naruto. I heard we have 3 stones now. That puts me a bit at ease. The man admitted. Yup. I even have a plan for Vision. When do you think we can take care of that? Can you come by now? The troops aren't fully prepared yet, but so long as Thanos isn't here I see no better time. What's the plan? Have Vision send off a few powerful bursts of power from the stone. I should be able to sense it even from here and I'll go to you. I'll explain everything once I'm there. He finished. Sounds good. Oh, don't bring Loki if you bring company. Captain America added hastily. Loki was pleasant company in Naruto's opinion. The man knew how to liven things up even in tense situations. That and the fact that both of them enjoyed the occasional prank here and there put him pretty high up in his books. People who knew how to relax and not take things too seriously were among his favorites. Fine, fine. He replied into the phone. I'll be quick about it so I won't be taking anyone. I'll see you soon. Figuring that closing the phone would end the call, he folded it and handed it back to its owner who looked a bit put off by the whole thing. It was then that he remembered that their group had some sort of civil war and were seemingly on bad terms. They would have to get over it soon. If anything went wrong and Thanos somehow won, they wouldn't be alive to hold that grudge. Knowing that Vision was somewhere else on the planet, he would need to extend his senses. Closing his eyes, he took a deep breath and exhaled calmly. Those watching focused their attention to the orange tint that had begun to appear on his eyes. Seconds later they were once again surprised to see that instead of blue eyes, a pair of toad-like eyes stared back at them. What the hell? Peter mumbled. What is that? This? Naruto asked, pointing to his eyes. Something to help me sense the stone a little better. Vision is somewhere in Africa after all. He replied as if it were the most obvious thing. Extending his senses as far as he could, he waited. Sage mode didn't feel quite the same as it did back home or even on Asgard. The planet was tainted and the natural energy that he did manage to collect felt like a much less potent version of what he usually got. Still, he was able to make it work. He could feel most of the people walking about for miles, almost to the point that he knew exactly what foot they were currently taking a step with. Needless to say, mastery over Sage mode was something of an understatement. As he tried to extend further, he felt it. A small pulse followed by another and then one more. That was it. Excuse me everyone. I'll be back soon. If everything goes well, we'll have stone number 4 on our side. With another tap of the staff, the blue portal opened up and he was once again gone. For someone with that much power, he's one of the more normal aliens we've encountered. Bruce commented. Tony scoffed. Normal? The guy is friends with Loki of all people. No normal person would willingly hang around that guy. Are you still upset that he threw you out of the window of your house? Peter asked. That was a lot of property damage. Do you know how expensive some of the pieces I had were? Tony shot back. Both Peter and Bruce rolled their eyes at the man's words. He spent more on the Iron Man suits than he did on anything else. Money was no issue to him. XXXXXX. Stepping out of the portal, Naruto was greeted to the sight of Captain America and his crew staring at him, or rather, the staff with curious gazes. The blonde noticed there was another man among them, this one with a darker skin complexion, but the man carried himself well. His head was held high and his clothing gave off the vibe that he was royalty. The added guards that stood behind him added to the effect. Naruto. Steve greeted. Good to see you again. Likewise. I assume this is the person you were counting on for help. He asked, turning to look directly at the man. That's right. I'd like you to meet King T'Challa, the current ruler of Wakanda. Naruto nodded and held a hand out which the king took instantly. The man's grip was firm and his gaze never strayed from Naruto's eyes. The blonde was impressed. A pleasure. Why don't we speak elsewhere about the situation with Vision? The man proposed. Lead the way. 2 more guards entered the room and Naruto smiled to himself. A display of force even though it wouldn't really amount to anything. He was sure Steve had told the man he was on their side, but it seemed he wouldn't take any chances just yet. That was fine, as long as they got the stone out of Vision's head, he didn't care how many people they brought. They would need to do this quickly though. He knew he'd never hear the end of it from Hela if he wasn't present for her inauguration.